Mom, it's Joe. Happy 102nd birthday. Wow, that's amazing. What do you get someone for their 102nd birthday? Well, I don't think you really need anything, but I did find a really interesting book. I was reading Canadian Living magazine one day, a couple of months ago, and they mentioned a book that partially took place in the Weyburn Mental Hospital where you used to work when you were a young'un before you got married. So I got it and I've read it and it's really interesting. So I thought I'm going to do you a video of me reading that to you, and thought you might enjoy it. Something different and something you can kind of break it up. You can listen a little bit at a time, or if there's a day when you want to listen to more, hopefully you can get someone to get the technology working and listen at your leisure. So I wanted to read you a little bit about what the author has said about this. Set in Canwood, Saskatchewan. Canwood is actually located up around Prince Albert in northern Saskatchewan. It sounds like it's a very tiny, sort of a farming town. Kind of sounded like Midale, actually, as they were describing it. So here's what the author says. Leonard Flint, a lonely boy in a small farming town, befriends the local outsider, a man known as Rabbit-Foot Bill. Bill doesn't talk much, but he allows Leonard to accompany him as he sets rabbit snares and to visit his small, secluded dwelling. Being with Bill is everything to young Leonard, an escape from school, bullies, and a hard father. So his shock is absolute when he witnesses Bill commit a sudden, violent act that loses him to prison. 15 years on, as a newly graduated doctor of psychiatry, Leonard arrives at the Weyburn Mental Hospital. Both excited and intimidated by the massive institution known for its experimental LSD trials. To Leonard's great surprise, at the Weyburn, he is reunited with Bill and soon becomes fixated on discovering what happened on that fateful day in 1947. So the story is based on a true event, and I'll show you what the book looks like. It's a nice kind of a nice cover. There's the book. And it's just basically the author's words with a few of my comments or surprise words interjected in there. And there's a few dog barks too. I was taping it out in the studio and Penny was out there with me and lying on her bed. And if you have to say hello at any point, she starts barking like a nut. So there's a little bit of dog barking. I just left it in for fun. So anyway, hope you enjoy your birthday, Mom, and can see some people in the family and have a nice piece of birthday cake. Take care. Hi, Mom, it's Joe, your second last daughter, second youngest, I guess I could call myself. How are you doing? I think it's December the 29th today. It's Tuesday. And I'm out in my studio, just enjoying, not a bad day. It hasn't started raining yet today, and we're in for some quite nice weather, like around +9 during the day, and it doesn't go down when we're raining. It doesn't go down very far at night, so nice West Coast weather. The grass is still green and people, surprisingly enough, still have some plants flowering, which is a bit weird. Anyway, I wanted to share something with you. I found this book. I read about it in the Canadian Living magazine, and I went out and bought it, and it's called Rabbit-Foot Bill by Helen Humphreys. And it's a book. Part of this book is actually set at the Weyburn Mental Hospital where you used to work. So that's the part I thought was pretty neat. And the time period that the story starts is 1947. So I think that's probably a little past your time when you were there. But nonetheless, it's a neat story. And it's got a murder in it, which you and I really like. So I thought I'm going to read it to you just so you have something to occupy your, sort of quiet times during the day. So a little bit about the story here. The writer says that, what she's writing about is about a murder that took place in a place called Canwood, Saskatchewan. Must be somewhere around, where you were, I would think. And it's in 1947. And apparently they were doing LSD trials, drug trials, at the mental hospital around that time. So it talks a little bit about that. And that's really what she focuses on. And I guess the boy that she's speaking to is a guy by the name of Hugh Lefebvre. And he was a boy in that town of Canwood for a period of time and was a friend of the guy who was the murderer. So interesting. The guy's name was Rabbitfoot Bill. So I'll just start reading, and hopefully with this you can kind of start and stop, and it's not very long, but it'll probably be 3 or 4 hours at least of straight, probably more than that because I'm a slow reader. Anyway, let's get going. So Bill never likes to leave town the same way twice. He strides out with an urgency I find hard to match. He leads me through the tamarack woods. He leads me through the meadow bog. He leads me through the tall prairie grasses. He leads me across the swift, shallow river. I usually have to run to keep him in my sight. We've been friends for a year, Bill and I, and although people don't approve, we're friends anyway. I like that Bill isn't bothered by what people say. Mostly he's just worried that someone will follow him out of the town and see where he lives. The reasons why people don't like my being friends with Bill are these. First, because he's a man and I'm a 12-year-old boy. And second, because he's a man who is not like other men. He doesn't talk much. He doesn't live in a house, doesn't have a real job. He doesn't have a family. People say he's slow, but as I've already said, I have to run to keep up with him. No one blames me for the friendship. They see it as Bill's doing, but really, it's me who pushed for it. I followed him around on the days when he sold his rabbit's feet in town and did odd jobs for Mrs. Odegaard. I hounded him with questions. I fetched him water when he was hot and thirsty. I wore him down with my attention, so now he's used to having me around. Why do you want to befriend a tramp? A tramp, my father said, and I can't tell him why. I can't explain this feeling of running after Bill under the long blue prairie sky. It's like he's leading me out of darkness, out of a loneliness I don't even know I have. Bill lives in Sugar Hill, right inside the hill. It takes ages to get there, so I don't go there very often, as Bill has to walk me in and then walk me back out again before nightfall. When we get to Bill's house, I'm always out of breath from rushing. Near Sugar Hill, I can hear his dogs barking. And when we're in sight, they come running up to greet us. There's a black dog and a gray, shaggy dog. Bill doesn't have names for them. He puts his hand on their heads, first the black dog, then the gray one, and they stop barking and follow us into the house. The house is carved into the base of the hill. There's a small wooden door that Bill can only get through by ducking down. But inside the house, he can stand up straight again. The dugout space is framed up with pieces of wood, and there are walls made from the large wooden grain dividers from the rail cars. There's a big main room with 2 pockets off it. One pocket is the kitchen, and the other is the bedroom. The kitchen has pieces of corrugated tin around the walls, and a stove made from a 45-gallon oil drum, with a fire hole cut out near the bottom, and a metal sheet laid on the top so water can be boiled and food can be hotted up. A stovepipe leads from the barrel through the earth overhead and pokes up outside like an animal nosing out of its burrow. In the bedroom, there's a bed made of hay bales and covered with rabbit skins. The main room has more hay bales for seats and a bookshelf that covers one wall. Sometimes, if it's bright outside and Bill's left the door open for light, I'll sprawl on the hay bales and look through his books. What's wrong with not working? What's wrong with lying on the hay bales, on the soft rabbit fur, with the dogs curled up beside you in the house you've made for yourself? What's wrong with wanting to keep away from people? There's not much about people that I like either. True statement. I have only been in this town for 2 years, but that's long enough to have made friends, and I don't have any. This will be the last time I come to Bill's house with him, but I don't know that yet. I've skipped school to be here. It's early summer. Bill's garden at the base of the hill is coming into bloom. We have to walk through it to get to the house, and he shows me things as we follow the path up to the front door. Beets, he says, pointing to a patch of bare earth. Rabbits ate the tops. Roses, carrots, onions. He stops in front of another square of empty dirt. This is where the lettuce used to be, he said. I blew it up trying to shoot the rabbits. I circle Bill like a fly on a horse. I want to be all around him all at once. Bill, I say, will you show me how to grow things? Will you take me hunting? Can I shoot a rabbit? Bill opens the door of the house, slouches down to fit inside the frame. Nope, he says, and steps inside. He turns as I'm coming through the doorway and picks me up, his huge hands grabbing me around the ribs and hoisting me up into the air. Quieten down, he says, as though he's talking to the barking dogs. The pressure of his hands around my ribs makes me squirm and kick out like a beetle. I can smell his sweat and the stale tang of his breath. He carries me over to the hay bales by the bookshelf and drops me. We eat great slabs of bread with jam made from the Saskatoon berries that grow in the gullies between the hills. Bill brews tea in a saucepan and we drink it out of 2 battered tin mugs. After he's finished drinking his tea, Bill puts some freshly severed rabbit's feet to boil in the tea water. Boiling them gets rid of the stray bits of flesh and blood and the dirt from their nails from when they were alive. People only want to buy a clean rabbit's foot. It's not lucky if it's not clean. Can I have another one, Bill? I ask. I lost the one you gave me. This isn't true. I've carefully kept all the rabbit's feet I've managed to make Bill give me. I have them lined up by size on the small plate beside my bed. Sometimes when I hold one in my hands, I push back the hair and feel each tiny toenail. It's the feel of the toenails that makes me remember that the foot was once alive. Last one, says Bill, and he walks over and drops a rabbit's foot in my cupped hand. Next time I'll have to be charging you. I know this isn't true either, but I pretend to take the warning. I can see that, Bill, I say, and I tuck the rabbit's foot into the pocket of my overalls. After the murder, I don't know what to do with the rabbit's feet. There are 6 of them altogether, enough for 3 full rabbits, since the only feet Bill uses for the charms are the hind ones. What I wish after the murder, when I'm lying alone at night in my room, is not that the boy was alive again, but that the rabbits were. I lay the rabbit's feet out on my stomach. I can feel the cold, thin bones and the ticky-tack of their nails against my skin. I want them to be conjured back into 3 living rabbits, each one warm and trembling, resting quietly, safely on my body. Rabbits sleep in a great rabbit heap in their burrows, but Bill cuts the feet off his rabbits. When Bill cuts the feet off his rabbits, he throws their bodies into a pile, ready for skinning. They seem asleep, furry body nestled into furry body, slung over one another in easeful abandon. They seem asleep until I look at their back legs and see the bloodied stick ends where their feet used to be attached. Why are rabbits' feet lucky, I ask. Dunno, Bill says with his back to me, trying to scoop the feet out of the boiling water before they disintegrate into soup. Is it because they're fast? Because they can outrun everything? I'm thinking that a rabbit runs so swiftly that it could even outrun trouble. Perhaps that's why it's lucky to carry their dried-up, shriveled feet in your pocket. They run fast, but they run in a pattern, says Bill. And once you've sussed out the pattern, they're easy to catch. He turns around from the stove and holds out a small, sodden rabbit's foot towards me and smiles. See? Before it's time for me to return home, Bill walks me up to the top of Sugar Hill. It's the highest point of land around, and looking down at the flat rectangles of fields and the squares of the grain bins makes me feel more bird than boy. Like I could fly right off the top of Sugar Hill, soar lazily above the prairie dusk. The dogs have come with us to the crest of the hill, and they wrestle with each other in the vetch. I like watching them fight because they mean it, and they don't mean it all at the same time. They can stop right away if they decide to. When I'm fighting, it's not that simple. The sun is lower than the hill, although it takes forever to sink beneath the flat plain of prairie in the long lean of light that takes afternoon to evening. At this moment, we're the highest point in the landscape, and I want to remark on this to Bill, but I can tell he's tired of my jabbering. He stands a little apart from me, arms at his sides. It's June. The light is long, but the air shifts cool in the evenings. I can still taste the winter in it. This was one of the last real times I spent with Bill, and I wish we'd spoken, or that he'd laid his hand on my head, as he sometimes did. But this didn't happen. I watched the dogs, and he watched the sky, and then he turned and I followed him back down the hill. He takes me to the edge of town and I walk along the rail lines until I'm home. We live at the station, and this station looks the same as all the other stations we've lived in. One small prairie town is the same as the next to me, and I don't know why my father thinks they're different. He's restless, my mother said once. He has a restless soul. But how is moving 20 miles down a rail line a cure for this restlessness? The only thing that makes this place better than the last one, it's Bill. Sometimes, coming home at night to the station, I actually, seriously forget which town I'm in. I'm going to take a break from there. Hi, Mom. Joe again. So we're picking this up a couple of days later. I find I can't read for very long without my throat getting sore, so that's weird. Anyway, let's get back to the story. The next day at school, and I have glasses on too, maybe it'll make my eyes work a little bit better. The next day at school, I try to keep well away from the group of boys who are always beating on me for reasons I never understand. It's raining, so I must be hit. We're doing sums in arithmetic, so I must be hit. The sky is a certain shade of blue, so I must be hit. I slink into the schoolyard just before the bell, keeping to the wall and lingering near a knot of girls playing hopscotch. When it's time to go into class, girls and boys are meant to line up separately before entering the building. I stay pressed to the brick wall until the last possible moment, and then scuttle in at the end of the girls' line. Once inside the classroom, it's safer because the teacher's there. Mrs. Clark likes order and carries a long wooden pointer, smacking it down on the edge of a student's desk if they start whimpering or horsing around. Many of my fellow pupils are afraid of Mrs. Clark, but I'm only grateful for her. While she's striding around the classroom or stiffly writing equations on the chalkboard, I'm safe from harm. No one will pick on me while we're in the class for fear of being seen to be disruptive. Today I'm the last to file into the classroom, and as I come through the door, Mrs. Clark moves behind me to close the door. "Where were you yesterday, Leonard?" she asks. I've already rehearsed my lie on the walk to school, and it slides easily out of my mouth. "Helping my father at the station, ma'am," I say. This is farming community. Teachers are used to their pupils missing school for chores. "Very well, then," Mrs. Clark says, "but I'll be needing a note from him the next time." "Yes, ma'am." The door clicks shut behind me, and I take my seat at my desk near the window. I don't mind school. It doesn't take much effort to be good at it, and I can spend some of the day paying attention and some of it staring out the window at the fields. I like to think of Bill, imagine what he's doing while I'm at work learning geometry or the provincial capitals. I like to picture him doing the most ordinary of things. Walking with his dogs or eating breakfast. He does a handful of things over and over again. And I know that what most of these things are. It makes me feel good to be able to recreate the activities of his daily life while I'm sitting at my school desk. Recess brings danger in the form of older boys in class who come sniffing for me like dogs after a rat. The pack of boys are led in their chase by a tall boy by the name of Snake, whose real name is Sam Monroe. I was last into the school and I'm first out at recess, hurtling through the door and out into the yard, flattening myself against the brick wall by the hopscotch girls. Sometimes the girls take pity on me and let me call out the numbers for them, but today I'm outside before they have a chance to assemble and the group of bully boys is right behind me. I can hear their feet slapping against the ground as they race after me. It sounds just like wings on a flock of ducks beating up from a pond. Snake grabs me around the neck, his hands sweaty and his breath oddly sweet. His angry face is just inches from mine as he pushes me hard up against the wall. Do you think you could escape your punishment?" he asks. It's not really a question, and I've learned from past mistakes not to answer him, even if he insists on it. Whatever I say will be wrong and will bring more trouble down on me. Instead, I pretend that I can't breathe, that he's cutting off my air supply. I gasp and sputter, hoping that my face is turning suitably red. I flail my arms and legs. And then, like a huge bird descending from the sky, like an angel from heaven, Mrs. Clark plucks Snake from me, and the other boys scatter like chicken feed. I rub my neck. It feels like a miracle, watching Snake be hauled away by Mrs. Clark, back through the door of the school for what is sure to be an energetic caning. But I know that that this moment of victory will be a short one, and that Snake will be after me twice as fiercely when he gets free from the teacher. The hopscotch girls are out in the yard now. They circle me like crows. One of them, Sally, who has a desk near mine, puts her hand on my arm. Are you hurt? I shake my head. My neck feels a bit sore, but it's nothing compared to what I usually suffer under the hands of Snake and his friends. I feel lucky, not hurt. Sally has kind brown eyes, and her frown is one of concern, not displeasure. I like the feeling of her hand on my arm. Why does he hate me? I haven't done anything to him. You're new, says Sally. Not that new. I've been in Canwood for 2 years. That seems like a suitably long time to me. You're new, she says again. And small, says one of the other girls. And then I do understand. It's not about me at all. It's because I've recently arrived at the school where probably there have never been any new students, any people outside of this small community, any strangers. And I'm small for my age, making it easy to pick on me. Somehow this makes me feel disappointed. I wish Snake's persecution was actually about me somehow, not just about aspects of my life I have no control over. It won't stop then, will it? I say. Maybe you'll grow bigger, says Sally helpfully. She takes her hand off my arm. Would you like to count for us until recess is over? The school is at the edge of town. If I walk through Canwood and out the other side, then along the dusty concession road, I'll arrive back home at the small farmhouse near the rail station, where I live now. If I head out in the opposite direction after leaving the school grounds, I can saunter through the open countryside all the way to Sugar Hill. I decide to go home after school rather than go in search of Bill. I've been lucky today in not being caught out in my absence from yesterday and in having Mrs. Clark save me from Snake. But I can't count on that luck continuing. What is true one day often stops being true the next. I'm a fast runner, so I can usually outrun any boy who wants to beat on me after school. But today I'm safe because Snake has been whipped and kept behind in detention, and no one else has the inclination to give chase without his lead. I can saunter through the streets of Canwood, taking my time to get home, bending down to pet a tabby cat or looking in the windows of the hardware store, or lingering outside the gas station because I like the sound of the bell when the cars drive over the rubber hose by the pumps. The town we lived in before this one was called Shell Lake. It seemed bigger, or maybe that was just because I was smaller then. I remember that the water of the lake was circled by rushes and reeds and that there was a forest out past the town. I went there once with my parents for an outing. I remember the way the trees talked to one another, high up and whispery, full of secrets. I'm thinking about the gossiping pine trees outside of Shell Lake, when I see a man crouching over in the cornfield. The ground is still turned from winter, the corn just planted, and so the field is bare and it's easy to spot the bent-over figure of Bill. I can't believe my luck. My feet fly over the stubble and lumps of earth to get to him. Bill! He looks up at my approach and grins at me. I run right into him and he circles my body with one of his strong arms to both hug me and stop my forward momentum. What are you doing here? I say. Bill is not often on this side of the town. He usually keeps to the countryside around Sugar Hill. It's more wild and remote over there. Fewer farms, less chance of meeting people. The rabbits will be after the corn, he says, holding out a loop of wire. And I'm after the rabbits. Can I help you set your snares? Won't they be waiting for you at home? Not yet. I can run all the way back after helping Bill and still make it home in time for supper. All right then. Bill sits back on his heels. You ever set a snare before? I'm home in time for supper, having run like a rabbit all the way from the cornfield to the farmhouse. My mother's in the kitchen. My father must still be at the station. Have you been fighting again? My mother turns from the sink when I come into the room. You're covered in dirt. Not fighting, I say, playing. Well, whatever you've been doing, go and wash up before supper. The little window in the bathroom overlooks the back of the house and the fields beyond it. When I left Bill in the cornfield, he was still setting snares. I climb up on the edge of the bathtub so I could look out of the window better. He's probably too far away to spot, but you can see a long way on the prairies. And so I look for any movement in the distant fields. I think I see the flutter of something dark on the horizon line, but it's so far away that it could just as easily be a crow as Bill. "Leonard," calls my mother from the kitchen, "what are you doing in there? I don't hear any water." When I come back into the kitchen, supper's on the table. There are only 2 plates of meatloaf and vegetables. We're not waiting for Daddy. He has to work late. There are lots of freights coming through tonight. I like it when the trains rumble into town at night. The tracks are close enough to the house that it shakes with the weight of the rail cars, making it feel as though I'm on board the train, heading for somewhere exciting, away from the prairies and into a big city like Toronto or Montreal. The meatloaf is recognizable as being formed from the leftover bits of cold beef from last night's supper. I poke at the block of it with my fork, separating out the squares of milky onion that I'm not keen on eating. "Sorry," says my mother, watching my careful dissection of her labors. "I forgot. Would you like me to make you a cheese sandwich instead?" Often I'm forced to sit at the table until I've finished my meal, whatever it is. It doesn't matter if I don't like certain elements of it, but today feels like a magic day, and I'm moving through it protected from anything I dislike or that causes me harm. Even my mother has fallen into line with this magic and doesn't seem bothered she has to make me a second supper. She is humming by the stove as she grills my cheese sandwich. After supper, I tell my mother I have homework so I can go lie in bed and think about setting snares with Bill in the cornfield, and wait for the trains to blow past the house, rattle the metal legs of my bed against the floor. The next morning, I run like a rabbit along the concession road, deke around the grain elevators by the rail tracks, and then slowly walk through town towards school, whistling the song my mother was humming the night before. When I turn the corner to Mrs. Odegaard's street, I see Bill out front, clipping her carragana hedge. He sometimes does gardening work and odd jobs for the old people in town. The old people seem much more forgiving of his ways than the people his own age, or the boys my age. "Bill!" I run the last few 100 yards to get to him as fast as I can. He doesn't stop his clipping, but he looks over his shoulder at me and smiles. It's a hot morning already, and it's not even 9 o'clock. I can see the sweat slick on Bill's face and arms from the effort of working on the hedge. He's bare-chested under his overalls. "I'll bring you some water," I say. "Don't make yourself late for school." I've got loads of time. I ran like a rabbit to get here. Bill smiles at that. "All right then, a glass of water would be welcome." Bill is nervous of the indoors. He doesn't like to be too long inside houses. It makes him feel trapped. He goes back to his clipping, and I walk up the path and into Mrs. Odegaard's house. She always leaves the kitchen door unlocked. She must be resting upstairs because she's not in the kitchen or the parlor. Pitcher of water is frosty from its spell in the icebox. I pour some into the largest glass I can find and take it outside to Bill. He downs the water in one swallow, wipes his mouth with the back of his hand, and passes the empty glass over to me. He's almost finished one side of the long hedge that grows between Mrs. Odegaard's house and the street. "I'll go fetch you some more, Bill," I say, and just as I'm turning to head back towards the house, I hear a whistle, and my body stiffens into place. I know that whistle, and it makes me afraid. "Well, well," says the voice, "if it isn't Crazy Bill and little Lenny." It's Sam Monroe. He's walking along, smoking a cigarette, then crossing the street and coming towards us. "Rabbit-foot Bill from Sugar Hill. He never worked and he never will." But he is working, I say, because it seems like a lie that Sam can chant this rhyme while Bill is so obviously cutting Mrs. Odegaard's hedge. "Shut up," says Sam. I didn't say you could speak." Takes a pull on his cigarette and blows the smoke right into Bill's face. Bill doesn't say anything, just looks square at Sam, and then plunges the shears hard into the boy's chest. Wow. I hear the thud of metal hitting bone, and I see the shocked expression on Sam's face as he crumples down to the ground. There's no blood until Bill reaches down and yanks the clippers out of his body, putting one foot on the boy's shoulder for leverage as he does this. Then the blood rivers out of Sam Monroe as fast as springtime. Bill wipes the shears slowly and deliberately on the leg of his overalls and then, without saying a word, goes back to work clipping the hedge. The snick of the clippers is the only sound around me. "Bill," I say, "Bill, I think he's dead. I think you've killed him." Bill turns from his work, looks at me, and says quite clearly he had it coming to him. The trial is swift, the verdict certain. Bill makes no effort to defend himself. I wait outside the courthouse on the day he's sentenced, and I watch him being led out of the building and into the police van. He's wearing 2 leg irons, 2 cuffs of steel around his ankles, and a short length of chain running between them. The irons look like a collar on a leg hold trap I saw Bill set once for a beaver. I yell to him, but he's too far away to hear me. What I never say to anyone is this: I didn't go for help. I stood there behind the hedge, a slow worm of satisfaction crawling through my body, watching Snake die. I was glad Bill had stabbed him. It was the nicest thing anyone had ever done for me. I don't know how I managed to find my way back to Sugar Hill, but I've remembered the way without even trying. The door to Bill's house never closed properly. It doesn't have a latch, just notches into the dirt on either side of it. And when I walk up the path through the garden, I see that it's wide open. The dogs have been at the rabbits. There are bones and bits of skin scattered across the earthen floor. There's a rabbit's skull by the stove in the kitchen. One eye still socketed into the hollow of bone. I stand in the middle of Bill's house and it suddenly seems small and squalid. Like a pit dug into the earth, like a grave full of animal bones. When Bill was here, it was huge. It was warm and cozy. Now I can feel the chill in the earth. And that cold that shrinks the place makes it seem smaller. Outside, the garden's been trampled by the dogs, or by the rabbits who must have grown suddenly bold with no one to shoot at them when they came to help themselves to the vegetables. The dogs are long gone. They must have been more wild than Bill supposed, and after the rabbit carcasses were devoured, left in search of other food. They aren't waiting to be taken care of by me. They've gone off to look after themselves. Maybe they'll know that Bill isn't coming back. Maybe they knew before I did. Bill always said the dogs are smarter than people. I climb up to the top of Sugar Hill and lie down in the vetch as the dogs used to. The clouds are low, flock across the sky above the hill. There's a fall of starlings and a rise of heat crawling through the grass towards me. It's the last warm light of afternoon. I'm a boy. I'm a dog. I'm the rabbits with their hind feet gone. I am the climb and the drop and the flat land below the hill, the flat sky above. I am this place and the long walk towards it. I'm everything he ever saw, everything he ever touched. I am all, I am only him. I'll take a break. Oh, we're back. So the next part, actually, we've moved forward some years to Saskatchewan in 1959, and it's actually at the Weyburn Mental Hospital, this part of the story. So Leonard has become a psychiatrist, from the prior portion of this book till now. So it's going to be the experience as he starts to work at the Weyburn Mental Hospital. I hear the sound of classical music before I open the door. Strings and the soft surge of orchestra, a soothing melody that stops me with a hand on the doorknob of the meeting room. I cock my head to one side and then to the other, like a bird listening. I can hear no voices, just the strains of this gentle music. When I open the door and enter the room, Dr. Christensen and 4 of the other doctors are gathered in a small circle of chairs at one end of the space. A gramophone plays the music I heard from the hallway. And on a low table in the center of the circle is a reel-to-reel tape recorder and 6 glasses of water. The curtains are drawn tight against the windows of the meeting room, and it takes me a moment for my eyes to adjust to the dimness after the brightness of the outdoors. I stumble as I walk across the carpet. "Ah, Leonard," says Dr. Christensen. "There you are, finally. Let me introduce you." He waves his hand towards a circle of white-coated men. Carl Hepner, Daniel Mortimer, Ben Carter, William Scott. "Dr. Leonard Flint," announces Dr. Christensen, waving at me in turn. None of the doctors say anything to me, but they all look hard in my direction. One of them nods at me. I've forgotten who he is already. I take a seat in the empty chair next to William Scott, a diminutive black man with glasses, older than me, but not by much, and the only man whose name I remembered because he was the last introduced. "Sorry I'm late," I say. "It took me a while to find the room." It had taken me a while to even find the building. Though I have been here for several days now, I hadn't fully realized how massive the hospital is. Mostly I've been in one small section of the compound. I hadn't known it would take me half an hour to even locate the right wing, let alone the meeting room itself. The scale of the complex is hard to adjust to. how the wings extend out from the central building like spokes in a wheel. I'm off in my perceptions the way a drunk misjudges the distance between the car and the curb when exiting a taxi. I'll recap for you, says Dr. Christensen helpfully. He raises an arm as though he's conducting the music that has slipped so gently through the gramophone speakers. Here at the Weyburn, we believe that no one is insane and no one is mad. In order to help the people in our care, we need to understand what they're experiencing, understand their reality. We're undergoing a series of experiments here concerning a drug known as lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD for short. What sort of experiments, I ask? LSD in its effects mirrors the mind of a schizophrenic. So in order to better understand the sensations schizophrenics experience, we are taking the drug ourselves and recording the event. I look at the tape recorder and then over at the record player. The soft, soothing background music, which first sounded so benign, is now beginning to unnerve me. But in the space where I'm listening to the music, the names of the doctors in the room suddenly come flooding in, and the order in which they were introduced. Music helps keep the drug experience a pleasant one, says Dr. Christensen, following my gaze. LSD is also helpful with alcoholics, says Dr. Carter. It often shows them the cause of their drinking by recreating their emotional states and experiences. Like time travel, says Dr. Christensen. We're also thinking of using it in psychotherapy sessions, says Dr. Mortimer, to be able to probe deeper into the subconscious. It's a consciousness-altering drug, says Dr. Hepner. It creates an alternate reality, says Dr. Carter. Really, it's just a different perspective of this reality, continues Dr. Christensen. Altered perception. Don't worry, Dr. Flint. My face must betray my nervousness. It's harmless, completely harmless, and we take only a moderate amount of the drug ourselves. He leans forward and picks up one of the water glasses from the table. It's administered as a liquid dose that has been mixed with water. Please, gentlemen. He gestures towards the table and the other doctors. They each take one of the glasses, and I do the same. Bottoms up, says Dr. Christensen, and we all drink them and then set the empty glasses back down on the table. It'll take about 20 minutes for the drug to take effect, said Dr. Scott to me. Try to relax. But I find it impossible to relax. I rub my sweaty palms on my thighs. My mouth feels dry, even though I've just drunk a full glass of water. The ticking on the clock on the wall behind Dr. Christensen's head suddenly seems unnaturally loud. Is it that LSD taking effect, I wonder? I stare at my shoes and the light brown carpet beneath them. Why had I agreed to be part of this experiment? Did I agree? When I took this job, I knew there were medical experiments going on at the Weyburn Mental Hospital. The place had the reputation of being on the leading edge of mental health treatments. This is why I took the job, because it would be an exciting place to work. It hadn't occurred to me that the experiments weren't only performed on the patients, but on the doctors as well. What should I do, I ask, full of panic. Just close your eyes and listen to the music, says Dr. Christensen. He leans forward and snaps on the tape recorder. Session 8, he says, Friday, August 14th, 1959. 10 a.m., participating doctors Hepner, Mortimer, Carter, Scott, Flint, and myself. He stops. The other doctors all have their heads bowed as though they're in church, and Dr. Christensen is about to deliver the sermon. This is the first experience for Flint, continues Dr. Christensen, the third for Scott, and the fourth for Hepner, Mortimer, and Carter. He pauses. For myself, this will be the 16th time under the influence of LSD. The music plays cheerfully on in the background. I don't know if I need my glasses anymore. The doctors and some of the psychiatric nurses at the Weyburn are housed in cottages distant from and out of sight of the main hospital building. The wood-frame single-story cottages are in a row, each about 100 feet apart, and facing the river that runs through the hospital grounds. Most of the cottages are one-bedroom units, but there are several larger ones at the end of the row designated for families. All of the doctors that were taking LSD with me in the meeting room live here on the hospital grounds. There are over 1,800 patients at the hospital at the moment, and staff is needed on site to manage them. The nurses and orderlies and office staff who don't live on the grounds of the hospital drive in from the nearby town. Dr. Christensen has a large brick house there. It was pointed out to me on the drive to the Weyburn by the orderly who picked me up at the train station. It was a much grander affair than these modest frame buildings. "Pays to be the big cheese," said the orderly. My cottage has a bedroom, small sitting room with an old sofa and 2 chairs, galley kitchen, bathroom with only a shower stall, no tub, and a screen porch that overlooks the river. The LSD experiments are a priority at the Weyburn, and on the mornings that the doctors take LSD, they're not expected to go back to work for the remainder of the day. It was hard enough for me to find the meeting room when I was sober, but reversing the process is even trickier. It takes me what seems like 3 months to walk back across the compound to my cottage, but when I get there, I find out that only half an hour has elapsed. Time is proving to be a very confusing entity today. I lie down on my bed, but closing my eyes makes me dizzy, so I stand up again, pour myself a glass of water, and take it out to the porch. It's afternoon, and the swallows arc and dive above the river in search of insects. Animal hunger always looks so graceful. Human hunger rarely does. I watch the swoop and stall of the birds and drink the water. I feel tired and a bit dislocated, as though I've just completed a long train journey and can't yet reconcile where I've arrived and where I started. The shift from medical school to a real hospital feels like such a shock. Everything seemed easier in the abstract. I concentrate on drinking and on watching the river in front of me. It's a modest river, not that wide, but it moves swiftly along. I can see the ripples of current on the surface, and I can smell the scent of the water, a rich, peaty odor of the sloughed-off bark and organic matter decaying on the riverbed. It's an old river, full of curves, the banks bulging out into small bays, and then narrowing over a series of shallow rapids. William Scott has the cottage next to mine on the right. He's also sitting out on his porch. I wave, but he doesn't appear to have seen me, just keeps staring ahead at the river. Probably he's doing the same thing that I am, trying to focus on what is right in front of him in an effort to recover from the lingering effects of the drug. Again, I think that the LSD, although taken in a group setting and meant to be interactive, has made us all the more inward-looking. I realize that I've gone from medical school, where I was part of a community that accepted me, where I had friends, to this place, where I'm completely new and know no one, where I not only have no friends, but I can barely remember the names of my colleagues. It's a good thing my girlfriend Amy's coming here for the weekend. I'm desperately lonely, and then immediately wonder if I'm really having this feeling or if it's a result of taking the LSD. Aside from settling into my cabin and having my information processed with the financial department, the drug experiment is the first real thing I've done in my new job at the Weyburn. It seems strange to do that before meeting any of my patients, but I realize that what's being demonstrated is the priority of the institution, or perhaps merely the priority of the leader of the hospital, Dr. Christensen. I sit out on the porch until I can see the first stars above the river. Then I feel hungry and tired in quick succession and go back indoors. After the laborious task of buttering a slice of bread, it seems somehow impossible to eat, so I just lie down on my bed and immediately fall into a deep, dreamless sleep. Dr. Christensen is volunteering the better part of a week to show me around the Weyburn. It takes this long to cover all the many and different areas of the huge compound. I've already seen the administrative offices and the fields that make up the massive farm. Now we're in the basement of the main hospital building, in a series of small windowless cells with heating and water pipes running through them at head level. This is where they used to put the severely retarded patients, says Dr. Christensen, back when they were called mental defectives. Pitiful, isn't it? He doesn't wait for my reply, strides on ahead through the dimly lit basement tunnels. It's an outright travesty, the way some poor unfortunates were treated in the past, he says. I admire his passionate outburst and remember the classifications from some of the older textbooks at medical school. High-grade moron for someone fairly functional, moron for someone less so, imbecile for the retardation level of medium grade, and idiot for a severely retarded person. Oh my goodness. This is how patients were categorized and not too long ago in the mental hospitals of the past. Back then, they were kept together in one big room, women and men, violent and non-violent, no respect given for them being individuals, and no concern for their safety. One of the medical school doctors talked about these patients from the old hospitals being stripped naked and hosed down weekly in lieu of being allowed to bathe themselves. Thank God for the reforms, sir, I say, struggling to keep pace with Dr. Christensen as he strides ahead of me through the basement corridors. No need for that, Flint. We're both doctors here. You can call me Luke. I don't feel I can call him Luke. I'm a freshly, barely qualified psychiatrist. He's older, more experienced, and the superintendent of this enormous facility with 1,800 patients and over 800 staff. There were no toilets down here, says Dr. Christensen in disgust, and no utensils for eating. The poor unfortunates had to mouth their food from bowls like dogs. That's terrible, sir, I say. I feel lucky to have landed this job so soon out of school. The Weyburn is renowned for its liberal policies and radical treatments. The influence, perhaps, of the new socialist government of Saskatchewan. This new government is all about reforms. They have instituted the Rural Electrification Project to bring electricity to the 60,000 farms in the region that do without. They are also encouraging the emptying of the mental hospitals, retraining the patients to return to the outside world, assimilating them back into the communities where they once belonged. The Weyburn might be full to bursting now with patients, but in a few years, it's hoped that it'll be completely empty. The tasks that the patients are required to do well at the hospital, working on the farm or in the mattress factory, will hopefully translate into skills they can use when they're reintroduced to the outside world. If you want to know the true history of a building, says Dr. Christensen, you go up or down. Down to the basement, up to the attic. That's where the secrets are. I know I'm supposed to be appalled at the conditions in the basement that the former patients suffered under, but I actually find the close, dark space rather comforting. The mental hospital has overwhelmed me. It's vast. When I came up the drive a few days ago, it felt as though I was entering another country. The driveway was flanked with trees, and it twisted and turned like the river. There's an entire working farm on the grounds with over 650 acres in cultivation and a full dairy herd. Oh, wow. All the food for the hospital is produced there. The Weyburn is an entirely self-sustaining community. The hospital itself is the largest building in the entire province of Saskatchewan. Dr. Christensen leads me up a flight of stairs and along a hallway. We're much too overcrowded at the moment, he says, flinging open a door to the dormitory. I looked into the room he's opened. It's a flat field of beds. Each bed has a housecoat slung over the iron bedstead at the foot, and a pair of slippers tucked underneath the middle of the bed, but there is no other personal space available. The beds are jammed together so tightly that to get to the bed on the far side of the room, one would have to walk across the other beds. There must be 50 beds in a room that's designed for perhaps 12. It's a bit tight, I say. Can't be helped. Dr. Christensen snaps the door shut and we continue along the corridor. Why are there so many patients? The Weyburn is the largest mental hospital in the country, but I can't believe that Saskatchewan has more mentally ill patients than elsewhere. In the 20s and 30s, people were just sent here, says Dr. Christensen. Those who were mentally retarded or who were suffering from other sort of shock, women who were going through the change of life or who were depressed after childhood. Anyone who behaved oddly for any reason could end up in the mental hospital. It was a dumping ground. To be honest, yes, Dr. Christensen runs a hand through his thinning hair. Probably half the patients weren't even mentally ill at all. So it might not be that hard to introduce them back into their communities. Hopefully not. My job, as I understand it correctly, is to help facilitate this. I am to be in charge of 100 men. If they do not have work already in the hospital city, I'm to find them some. Those that are working on the farm or in the mattress factory or in the power plant, I am to help make the transition from their jobs at the hospital to equivalent jobs in the town and villages outside the hospital. I'm to be more of an employment counselor than psychiatrist. I'm not sure how I will be at helping with this, I said. It's a bit outside of my limited experience. Dr. Christensen stops in front of another door, turns to face me and puts a hand on my shoulder. Leonard, why did you want to become a psychiatrist? I want to help people who can't help themselves. Here we're helping people to help themselves. Dr. Christensen pats me on the shoulder as one would pat the head of an obedient dog, which is actually a whole lot easier. You'll be fine. He opens the door of the room and I see 40 or 50 grown men in various stages of childlike behavior. Some are on their knees on their beds, rocking, their heads bumping against the bed frames in a rhythmic tattoo, like a heartbeat. Some men are just sitting on the edges of their beds, staring into space and talking to themselves. This is the little boys' room, says Dr. Christensen. Nothing to be done with these men, I'm afraid. They won't be leaving here. He shuts the door crisply, and we continue along the corridor. The ward that I'm to be in charge of consists of 2 dormitory rooms separated from each other by a sitting room and a kitchen, where the patients are expected to prepare their own breakfast before heading off to work for the day. Lunch is provided for them at their workstations, and dinner is served back here on the ward in the evenings. Here it is, says Dr. Christensen, your new domain. We're standing in the kitchen. He waves his arm towards the sitting room. These men will become your new family. You'll be like their father. I will? I feel much too young to be their father, and especially to full-grown men who are all older than I am. I don't know what I imagined when I was in medical school, but it wasn't this. I was thinking more of one-to-one psychiatric sessions, of everything being measured and under my control, of grateful patients and my various brilliant diagnoses of their treatable conditions. I had imagined a safe, tiny office with pictures of flowers or birds on the nice wall out on the walls and comfortable chairs to sit in, perhaps a nice view of the window of trees and sky. The patients would enter individually, sit and talk for an hour, and then leave again. Several months, a year, and they would be cured of what had made them seek out treatment. I had not imagined the chaotic situation where I now found myself. But I had been persuaded into applying for this job by one of my teachers, who had convinced me that it would be a remarkable opportunity to work for an institution that was employing such innovative techniques to treat mental illness. I wish I'd had such opportunities when I was a young doctor, I remember him saying, and I was swayed by this because I know that my father felt regret for some parts of his life. I don't want to feel regret for anything in mine, but it all feels a bit overwhelming now that I am here and expected to do a job. I look around the kitchen and sitting here and try to imagine it filled with 100 men, all looking at me for advice and guidance. How can I possibly be of assistance to 100 men? I would have been better served going into dentistry. Looking into mouths all day would be better than this, and there would be regular hours, and perhaps the bright lights in the examination room would be cheering. Now we'll head to the gymnasium, says Dr. Christensen, already back in the hallway. I'm particularly proud of our monthly dances and the patients' bowling league, and I want to show you where we keep the badminton nets and soccer balls. My first morning on the ward, I meant to wake up early enough to have breakfast with the men in my charge, but I sleep through my alarm, and by the time I have run across the field between the cottages and the hospital, most of my patients have already left for their day's work. The ones who are still there, washing dishes and wiping down the tables, eye me suspiciously when I burst through the sitting room doors, out of breath and panic-stricken. I had meant to give a little speech to the assembled men, introduce myself, and let them know I'll make myself available to them. But there's no point when so few remain on the ward. I'll have to wait for dinner when they're all back here again. In the meantime, I'll busy myself with reading their files, trying to learn their names and histories. My office is at the end of the ward, a pleasant square cinder block room with a window that overlooks the laundry building. I have the duty nurse retrieve the relevant documents for me, and I fetch myself a cup of coffee from the staff lounge. Then I settle down to a day's work of perusing the case files of the 100 men in my sudden and so far hapless care. It is as I thought, in that most of the men in my charge are older than me. Many are alcoholic. Some are schizophrenic, some depressive. There's one pyromaniac named Henry Tudor, who's been sent to work in the mattress factory. Putting an arsonist in a building full of flammable materials would not be my first choice, but I can also see the strange logic in it. After all, if Henry wants to start a fire, he'll start it no matter where he is. Why not put him in a path of temptation? This would be a way to cure him of his fiery impulses. Many of the men were sent to the mental hospital by their families. Some were former wards of the state, and a few men were actually born in the mental hospital. Their files have the word institutionalized written inside the box for listing the particulars of their disease. These men have never known anything but this place, and even though they're being trained to be functional in the outside world, how will they survive the chaos and unpredictability of normal life? How will they be able to comprehend it? Are people really versatile enough to deal with such radical change in their lives? Especially those who have had to cope with such extremes of experience. I remember Dr. Christensen telling me on the hospital tour that babies born at the mental hospital are sent immediately to a regular hospital so as not to have born at the mental hospital written on their birth certificates. Most of these babies will have nothing wrong with them in the psychiatric sense, but growing up on the ward in the company of mentally ill adults will force a kind of mental illness on them, and they'll have difficulty adapting to what we think of as regular life. Finding a place for these patients outside of the institution will be a much harder task than finding placements for those men who have had some experience of the world outside the hospital walls, and who remember what it was like to belong to that other life. I feel less overwhelmed as I read the case files. The more I learn about the men, the less alarming they seem. I can find commonalities with them as individuals, and they don't seem as frightening as they were before I knew anything about them. At medical school, I excelled at diagnosing, at compressing relevant patient information into a condition with a treatable outcome. Several of the alcoholic patients have notes tucked into their files that read, "Select for behavioral modification experiments." The notes bear the signature of Luke Christensen. This must mean they're targeted to undergo LSD treatment. I remember Dr. Christensen saying that the therapy worked particularly well on alcoholic patients. At lunchtime, one of the duty nurses brings me a tray of food: pea soup, cold sandwich, dish of custard, another cup of coffee. It's not bad, and I finish it all, reading the files while I eat, careful not to smear my lunch over the crisp white typewritten pages that summarize each man. When I began reading the files, the individuality of each patient stood out for me. But by the end of the day, I've read through so many files that the particulars of the patients swim together into a mass of indistinguishable detail. What man was sent here with his sister? Which man has uncontrollable rages? When I arrive that evening, I find I don't need to announce myself to the men. My white coat does this for me. "Look, it's the new doctor," someone shouts as I enter the kitchen, and everyone seems to turn and stare at me as I walk across the floor and take a seat at one of the long tables by the window. "Doc," says the man opposite me, "I need stronger pain medication for the arthritis in my knees." "I'm waiting for a package," says another man. "I don't know why it hasn't come." "My mother hasn't come," says someone else. The air is full of complaints and requests. In a moment of sudden inspiration, I take my notepad and a pen from my breast pocket, and I pass these to the man on my left. "Write down your request," I said, "and put your name beside it, and I'll deal with each man's problem in turn." The dances at the Weyburn were very popular, much more popular than the pottery program would have been, even if people weren't eating the clay. Physical activity is always more stimulating than something static like arts and crafts. Better to run after a ball or swing a racket than paint a night sky full of clumsy stars or make skinny animals out of pipe cleaners. At dinner before the dance on Friday, the men on my ward are buzzing with excitement. "It's best when there's a live band," one of them says, "and worse when the band is made up of people from here because no one is any good." "A dead band," offers another man. "I'm struggling to learn their names and having no luck, but at least they're beginning to look familiar." "Remember when someone drowned in a well after the dance last year? It was an awful mess fishing him out," a third man says. "They didn't find him until weeks later," explains someone else. I'm getting used to these dinner conversations, how topics slide with alarming rapidity from one topic to another, and often ends with death. It's a kind of shorthand that's familiar that families use. No need to explain everything when the participants know one another so well. The men in this ward and on each ward of the hospital have been together for years and have an intimacy that speaks to that. At the dance, the music plays through a gramophone, with two of the patients controlling the placement of the records on the turntable, one to snatch the record off and the other to put the new one down. Not a foolproof method, says William Scott, who has come to stand beside me against the wall. I'm told there have been fist fights if one of them does their part too slowly. There are punch bowls and 2 kinds of cookies, and the streamers hanging from the ceiling. Streamers hanging from the ceiling are only slightly lopsided. I dance with one of the nurses and several of the female patients. No one, including myself, is a very good dancer. What do we lack in skill we make up for in exuberance? I find I'm enjoying myself more than I thought I would. It's good to stop worrying about what kind of job I'm doing and just move my feet in time with the music. The main hospital path leaves the front entrance, passed by some of the farm buildings, and then winds along the river to the cottages. The cottages are probably a mile distant from the hospital, the farthest buildings from the main compound. I suppose this is meant to ensure we have some measure of privacy, but now the distance feels excessive. I'm passing the stables where the work team of horses, the Percherons, are housed, and I see the man. He's moving alongside the outside of the building, far enough away to be in the shadows, and he has his back to me, but I recognize the way he moves as though it was myself, moving in my own skin. I rush from the path towards the barn, but by the time I get there, the man who I swear is Rabbitfoot Bill has disappeared. When I get back to the cottage, I can't quiet myself. I lie in bed, I get up and pace around the room, I make some tea, I walk outside, and I stand by the river. I go back indoors, I sit in a chair, I lie down in the bed again. When I was 12, they took Bill away to the Prince Albert Penitentiary because there was not a hospital for the criminally insane. I've never been to the prison, and I know that it's a hard place, a very severe place. This mental hospital is a resort in comparison. The inmates there would not have the freedom of this institution. The prison is not a place for rehabilitation. It's a penitentiary with cells and punishments. But if one was a good prisoner there, followed the rules and didn't cause any trouble, then perhaps they might be transferred to a place such as this. Is this how Bill got here? It is half my life ago, but I can remember Bill and my time with him as though no years have passed at all. I can feel it in my body, the pull of wanting to be near him, and I realize with a shock that nothing has altered with my becoming an adult, that I still love him as much as I ever did. In the morning, I search out Dr. Christensen in his office. I was wondering, I say, if there's a patient at this hospital by the name of William Dunn. Dunn? Dr. Christensen gets up and goes over to the filing cabinet near the window. He opens the top drawer and rifles through the folders. One of your patients, he asks. No, not a patient of mine, but he's from the same small town as I am. I used to know him there, and I thought I saw him yesterday here, out near the barns. Dunn, William, here. Yes, it is. Yes, here it is. Dr. Christensen extracts a file from his cabinet and brings it over to his desk. He opens it. He was transferred here from the Prince Albert Penitentiary 2 years ago. We have him working with the horses. He's good with animals, seems to have a knack. That's strange. Dr. Christensen looks up at me. Seems we allow him to sleep in the stables instead of the ward. He always preferred animals to people, I say, and he had trouble being indoors. He may sleep in the stables, said Dr. Christensen, but technically he is on a ward and has a doctor in charge of him. I'm afraid it's not your ward, Flint, he says, shutting the file, and you're not his doctor. It might upset him to see someone from his past. He's not schizophrenic, but he displays periodic bouts of psychotic behavior. It's probably best if you don't renew your acquaintance with this William Dunn. I run out to the stables as hard and fast as I can, my white doctor's coat flapping behind me like a sail. It's dark inside the building, and it takes a moment for my eyes to adjust to the change in light. I stand just beyond the doors, panting. I can hear the whicker of the horses and the rasp of my own breathing, and then I can see him, can see Bill. He's standing outside the row of stalls, a bucket in one hand, a length of rope in the other. He looks taller and leaner, but otherwise recognizably the same. The same thick black hair, the same long limbs. Bill! I shout across the warm darkness of the barn. Bill, it's me, it's Lenny. He comes towards me then, bucket and rope still in his hand, until he's standing right in front of me. His face is more deeply lined, and his eyes have a flicker of fear or nervousness in them that they didn't possess before. But he's still the same man I remember from when I was a boy. I feel flooded with happiness. Doctor, he says, what did I do? No, Bill, it's me. It's Lenny from Canwood, from where you lived in Sugar Hill, remember? He peers at me, even though we're standing inches away from one another. He looks deep into my face, his forehead tightened into a frown. I don't know you, doctor. Because I wasn't a doctor then. I was a boy. I was a 12-year-old boy when you last saw me. I don't look exactly the same. I want to say, when you last saw me, when you killed Sam Monroe, when they took you away, when you were called Rabbitfoot Bill. But I don't want to upset him with unpleasant associations from the past. I used to come and see you in your house in Sugar Hill. How did you know I lived in Sugar Hill? Because I'd visit you there. You would? You often did work for Mrs. Odegaard, and I would visit you there too. Remember? You used to cut her hedge. Bill considers for a moment. Yes, he says after a while, I recollect I did cut a hedge. Don't you remember me, Bill? I know he probably underwent all sorts of punishments when he was in prison. He might have been tortured by guards or by the other prisoners, or sent to rot in solitary confinement. He's sure to have suffered from various deprivations, and maybe this is why he can't seem to make the leap from the image of the boy I was to the image of the man I've become. I've changed, but surely not completely. Breaks my heart that he doesn't recognize me. No, Bill shakes his head slowly. I don't believe I do know you. Well, I'll try to help you remember. All right, Dr. Lenny, Bill says agreeably, if that's what you want to do. That's what's different about him. A passivity that wasn't there when he was a free man. Most likely this is the result of years of institutional living. I hate to think that he's been broken, that his spirit's damaged, but I also have to accept that 12 years of captivity will change any man. You live here now, I asked, in the stable? Bill nods. I notice that the bucket he's carrying is full of water. That bucket must be heavy. Put it down for a moment and show me where you live. Bill obediently places the bucket on the floor of the stable and leads me back past the row of stalls to a large enclosure on the left-hand side. He pushes open the swinging half door and I see the cot, bedding neatly made, a small table beside it with a flashlight and a cup on it. The rest of the stall is empty and very, very clean. There's more room here than on the ward, I say, and Bill nods again. I couldn't abide in there, he says. There were too many people. They made too many noises. Don't the horses make noises? I look down the row of stalls at the heads of the horses all turned towards us, watching curiously. I know what the horse noises mean. People sometimes make noises that have no sense to them. I have an overwhelming desire to throw myself down on Bill's bed the way I would throw myself onto the fur-covered hay bales in his house on Sugar Hill. Do you miss Canwood? I asked. Do you miss Sugar Hill? Bill shifts from side to side as though it makes him uncomfortable to think back to the town and to his home. Perhaps it upsets him too much to remember anything about the murder, and that's why he's blocked out the memory of me also. I like it here, he says. What do you like? The horses. What about the hospital? I don't go into the hospital unless a doctor comes out here and tells me to. Bill reaches out and touches his shoulder. That's what I thought you were here to do, Dr. Lenny. Make me come back with you to the hospital. You have the look of a doctor. I am a doctor, I say, but I haven't come to make you do anything. I just wanted to see you, Bill. Because you know me? Yes. I like the heaviness of Bill's hand on my shoulder, and it feels exactly like I remember. And because you know me. I should rotate where I sit every evening at dinner, moving among the men so I get a chance to talk to all of them, to know them. But when I enter the ward kitchen, the men have left the space free where I had been sitting the previous night, and so I just sit back in the same place as last night and beside the same people. Supper is spaghetti and meat sauce with bread and baskets on the table and apple pie for dessert. The bread's not as good as the bread Bill used to make in his outdoor oven. It's white and full of air and the crusts are stale, and it seems like it might have been baked a few days ago, rather than having been made fresh for tonight's supper. Doc, says the man beside me, did you see about my package yet? I'm looking into it, I say, but I realize I haven't even opened the notebook where I had the men write down their complaints and requests. Tomorrow, I think, wiping my plate around with the substandard bread because I'm hungry after swimming in the river. Tomorrow I'll do a better job at my job. I became a psychiatrist because of Rabbitfoot Bill, because I could never shake the sight of him being taken away at the end of his trial. He was adept at living how he lived, but he couldn't cope with the ordinary ways of society, because I couldn't help him with this. When I was a boy, when I grew up, I wanted to be able to help others like him. This is what I told myself all the way through medical school, but perhaps I was wrong. Perhaps it wasn't that I wanted to help a legion of unknown people, but I only really ever wanted to help Bill. It was easy to pretend otherwise when he had disappeared out of my life. Now that he's back in proximity to me, I am no longer interested in the welfare of anyone else. It takes all my strength to remain seated in the ward kitchen, finishing my supper, making polite conversation with the men around me, and not rushing out to the stables to eat with Bill. The next morning I wake up determined to prove myself wrong, determined to better serve the men who have been entrusted to my care. I'll do this by systematically visiting them where they work. I can get to know them in an active setting and on an individual basis rather than in the passive group setting of the ward. I began with the mattress factory and Henry Tudor. From the files, I know that Henry Tudor was the victim of a house fire when he was young. The fire killed his family. Not only did he never recover from his loss, but he grew up to be a pyromaniac, setting a series of fires in the ramshackle garages and sheds in the west end of the city. It's unclear from his file whether he was the one who set the original fire, the one that killed his mother and father and baby brother. Like Bill, Henry Tudor was first sent to the penitentiary and then moved here to the mental hospital. Now he works in the mattress factory, a low brick building opposite the farm. There, all the mattresses for the hospital are made and repaired. There are sewing machines and bolts of fabric for the mattress covers, bundles of batting, all jammed into a space that's not much bigger than a dormitory on the wards. I ask the supervisor for Henry Tudor, and he points to the back of the room. I see a middle-aged man shuffling towards me with an armful of mattress batting. He shuffles forward, and then he seems to shuffle back. Then he shuffles forward again. What is he doing? I ask the supervisor. That's the way he moves. 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. He's slow, but he gets where he's going in the end. Here in the shop, we call him two-step. I walk towards Henry Tudor, and when I get close, I can hear that he's saying something under his breath as he shuffles forward and then back again. Burn their heads, burn their bodies, burn their bones, he says, the rhythmical incantation driving the movement of his feet. Or the other way around. I can't tell. Burn their heads, burn their bodies, burn their bones. Hello, Henry, I say. But he keeps his head bowed, keeps muttering his line of words, keeps shuffling his way towards the front of the room. Henry, I grab his arm to stop his forward movement, to make him acknowledge me. He looks up with panic in his eyes, and I realize my mistake in touching him. Burn their heads, burn their bodies, burn their bones, he says loudly, as though the words have become a spell to ward me off. Burn their heads, burn their bodies, burn their bones. He's shouting now, and the other workers in the factory have looked up from their tasks and are watching us. I let go of his arm. It's okay, I say. It's okay. I just wanted to say hello. I didn't mean you any harm. Henry has his head lowered again, and the line of words is being spoken at a softer volume. He resumes his strange, halting walk as though I'm not there at all, and so I retreat back to the supervisor. I didn't mean to upset him, I say. He's on my ward. I just want to make contact with him. Henry's not really one for contact, says the supervisor. He had a smirk on his face. I could have told you that if you'd asked. Again, I feel I've made another mistake, that for all my good intentions, I'm botching this job at every opportunity. Every time I reach out, something goes wrong. Next, I go to visit Marcus Stubing, who sweeps up here in the barber shop. He scuffs the broom across the floor, pushing the locks into a dustpan, and empties the dustpan into a large metal garbage bin in the corner of the room. Then he comes back and repeats the task. Do you like your job? I ask, following him to the garbage bin. No, I hate it. Would you like me to find you something else then? No. Why not? I'd hate it. Marcus Stubing leans on his broom and looks hard at me. I hate this whole friggin' place. I'm being kept here against my will. But the hospital is being emptied, I say. I don't think anyone wants to keep you here against your will. No one wants to keep you here at all. I can work at getting you a job outside of the hospital. Others have tried, said Marcus darkly. Others have failed. He knocks the broom against his shoes. You're in my way. You need to move. I skitter a few feet to the left. Do you like hair then? I ask. What kind of question is that? Marcus regards me suspiciously. I mean, I could look for work for you as a wig maker at a wig maker's or in a barber shop in town. I'd hate that. I hate hair. But you're doing this job, sweeping up hair. I have to do something, don't I? Says Marcus. They make me do something. He mumbles something under his breath. Pardon? It's all against my will, he says, including this conversation. Bridie McIntyre works in the kitchen. When I enter the vast underground chamber, I find him chopping carrots and onions for tonight's shepherd's pie. I walk over and stand behind him at the counter. Hello, I say. I'm Leonard Flint. You're a member of my ward. I know, Doc. I met you at supper last night. Bridie doesn't take his eyes off from his task. The knife knocks against the chopping board with finality. No, 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 it seems to be saying. I just want you to know if I can be of any assistance to you in any way. I'm a little busy now, Doc, says Bridie. I don't really have time to help you out. And that's just it, I think. Backing out of the kitchen. He would be helping me, not the other way around. The sound of the knife mocks me as I leave. No, no, no. Well, Bridie, I think, just because you have a concrete task to accomplish doesn't make you a superior being. And Bridie, isn't that a woman's name you have? I inhale the dark of the stable as though it were the sweetest smoke. I like that I can't see anything right away, and the moments it takes my eyes to adjust to the dimness are like moments of weightlessness, like I'm falling backwards through time and I'm landing as a boy inside the dark of Sugar Hill. Bill has one of the horses out of its stall and he's brushing it. When I walk across the floor of the stable towards him, he reaches down and picks up another brush and hands it to me. I thought you might be back, he says. Might as well put you to work. The horses have been outside much of the morning and their coats are covered in dust. When I sweep the brush in small arcs across the back of the animal, dust rises and hangs in the air, settles on my clothes, finds its way inside my nose and mouth. I've been trying to do my job, Bill, I say, trying to help the men on my ward, but I don't feel competent enough or old enough. I don't think anyone respects me or even likes me. People are not much good, says Bill. They never have been. It's no use trying to make them so. We're standing on opposite sides of the horse. I can feel the great shuddering heat of the animal between us. Can see the top of Bill's head above the withers. Do you remember me yet, Bill? No. The horse snorts and stamps its foot, and a cloud of dust rises and drifts down the stale air between us. I used to come and see you in Sugar Hill. You used to make me bread in your outdoor oven. I do recall an oven. Out of doors, as you say. He pauses, leans over the back of the horse, looks at me. Go on, tell me something else to make me remember. You had dogs, 2 of them, a gray one and a black one. The gray one was Scruffy. What were their names? They didn't have names. Bill grins. Yes, that's right. What else? What else do you know about me? I put my hand in the pocket of my doctor's coat and take out the rabbit's feet. I've been carrying them around all day. Each time I talked to one of my uncooperative patients, I would put my hand in the pocket of my coat and feel the reassuring softness of the rabbit fur. The hard flecks of the bones, the small sharp nails, and I would feel comforted. I passed the rabbit's feet over to the back of the horse to Bill. You gave these to me, I say. Bill lays the 6 rabbit's feet beside one another in the palm of his hand. His hand is so big that there's room left over for at least another 3 rabbit's feet in there. These were mine? They were. You used to sell them in town in Canwood. Bill looks at them carefully. I must have trapped them first, he says. You did. What kind of trap did I use? A snare. I can see Bill inside his dugout home in Sugar Hill, holding up the hoop of wire and grinning, then lowering it around my wrist and slowly tightening it to demonstrate how he killed the rabbits. Bill studies my face. If I gave you this many feet, then I must know you. I must have liked you. Do you look any different? I was a boy then. A boy, yes, Bill says slowly. A boy was often kind to me when I lived in Sugar Hill. Tries to pass the rabbit's feet back to me, but I shake my head. No, let's share them between us. Let's take 3 each. I reach across and take half the rabbit's feet and drop them back into my coat pocket. Bill curls his hand around the remaining 3. All right. I feel that we made a promise to each other by doing this, that here in the dark of the stable with the horse standing witness between us, we've agreed to the one thing I've always known to be true. Bill and I belong to each other. We belong together. When the supper hour comes, I intercept the food cart in the hallway outside one of the dormitories and take a tray of food. Instead of going to eat in the kitchen with my patients, I take a supper tray back outside and head over to the stables. The August night is coming on. Already there's the faint shape of the moon hammered into the dusky sky. The first star shines bright above the river. Bill's sitting in his stall, his tray of food balanced on his lap. He moves along the bed so there's room for me to sit down, and I sit down next to him. Put my tray of food across my lap in imitation of him. I can feel the shudder down the row of stalls as a horse rubs his coat against the boards. Bill eats noisily. I can hear the muscles in his jaw popping as he chews. He holds the tray steady with one hand and shovels the food in with the other, and barely pauses for breath. I run my fork over the potato crust of the shepherd's pie on my tray, and when Bill is finished with his supper, I slide mine along to him. You can have it too. I don't feel much like eating. Bill grunts in response and dispatches my meal with the same admirable efficiency as he finished his own. When he's done, he puts both trays on the floor, one piled neatly on top of the other, and he stands up, wipes his hands on the front of his trousers. I have work to do, he says, dismissing me. I could help you. Bill stands beside the bed, staring down at me with a look in his eyes that I can't quite read. He seems to be assessing both whether I can do the work that's required and whether or not he wants my company while doing it. You should take your white coat off then. It'll get dirty. I help him muck out the stalls and put new straw down for the horses. We work without speaking under the light of the bare bulbs that hang on their cords over the aisle outside the stalls. I like the weight of the pitchfork and the smell of the clean straw. I like feeling the prickle of sweat starting at the back of my neck. I look at my doctor's coat folded on the door of a stall. How proud I was when I first put that coat on. How relieved I feel now to have taken it off. Bill is a strong and steady worker, and we just do what we have to do until it's done. Moving methodically down the row of stalls until at the last one, he shovels the horse shit out and sluices down the floor with a pail of water, and I spread the new straw. We refill the water buckets and give the horses each a small nose bag of oats. Then we lead them back into their stalls and latch each of the doors. The bulbs swing on their cords where the horses are brushed against them when they were ambling back into their berths. The air is close and hot. I wipe my forehead with the sleeve of my white shirt. Let's go outside, I say to Bill. He follows me through the stable door. The night feels as cool as water on my skin. There are the sounds of crickets and the low loop of an owl across the field. Let's lie down on the grass, I say, and we stretch out on our backs an arm's length apart. Bill, what happened to you after you were taken away from Canwood? That was a long time ago, said Bill. I don't like to think on it. But do you remember? Some of it, Bill sighs. It's a sound like the horses make. Most of it, he says. What happened first? What happened when they took you out of the courtroom after the verdict? They put me in a truck with no windows. The truck went fast, all fast and bumpy. I didn't know where I was. It was just a box with no windows in the back of the truck. They took you to prison? They put me down a hole and fed me through a slot in the door. Did they hurt you? Not right away. Did they work you? I wouldn't have minded that, but mostly I was kept in the hole. I could put my arms out and touch the walls if it was like a grave. I remember an article from medical school that described the rationale behind the building of the early prisons. The cells were meant to resemble graves. It psychologically unhinges a man if he can touch the walls of his cell with arms outstretched. This is meant to be part of the punishment, this psychological unhinging. They wanted the prisoners to become insane from their isolation and confinement. What did you think about when you were in your cell? Nothing. Nothing at all. There was no point in thinking of anything because I couldn't change where I was. Even in my thoughts, I couldn't get out of that hole in the ground. There seems like no worse hell to me. I hate to think of Bill's suffering during those years. You must have been glad when they moved you, I said. Yes. It's a very different place here. I like it. I like the horses and the people leave me alone, except for you. Do you mind? Do you mind that I come to see you? Bill's quiet for a moment. No. I can tell from the nearness of his voice that he's turning his head towards me and that he's watching me. I might even like it, Dr. Lenny. We lie on our backs under the rattle of stars. We pushed our breath out in unison, haul it in again, until our breathing makes engines of our body in the dark. Dr. Christensen stops me in the corridor on my way to the ward kitchen. How are you managing, Flint? He asks. Fine, sir. He puts a hand on my shoulder. Dr. Christensen keeps his hand on my shoulder and squeezes it gently. I've let you have your head, he says, but I think it's been long enough for that. You've had enough time to get settled in properly by now. I need to look at what you're doing. You do? I'll trail you during your rounds, say next Thursday morning. We can start out here, Flint. He takes his hand away from my shoulder. 9 o'clock sharp. For Dr. Christensen to accompany me on my rounds, I need to have rounds. I have less than a week to invent a routine that seems like it's been placed from the day I arrived at the mental hospital. After breakfast, I walked over to the mattress factory. When Henry Tudor sees me coming, he scuttles to the back of the room. But I know better this time. I approach the supervisor first. He's in a small office by the bolts of ticking, typing clumsily on a portable typewriter. Hiya, Doc, he says. You're back. He pulls the sheet of paper from the typewriter and lays it on the desk. Order forms. They'll be the death of me. We seem to run out of something every second day. Puts both hands behind his head and leans back in his chair. What can I do for you, Doc? Are you here to have another dance with two-step? No, I think I'll sit this one out. I move a few feet further into the room. I want to know who's ready for a job outside of this hospital. Who are your best workers? Well, says the supervisor, my best workers aren't necessarily the ones who are fit on the outside world. Two-Step is actually quite a good worker, but it wouldn't do to send him loose in town. One man. Just tell me the name of one man who's ready for outside employment. Rusty Kirk, says the supervisor. You'll find him third sewing machine from the wall on the left-hand side. Rusty Kirk is a man in his late 30s with an impressive mop of red curly hair. I can see the shine of his hair from across the room. Mr. Kirk. He looks up from his sewing machine. His mouth is a little twisted, and there's a long scar running down his cheek. I'm Rusty Kirk, he says. I'm Leonard Flint, Dr. Leonard Flint. You're on my ward. Did I do something, Doc? I feel like I'm incompetent in my job, but my patients always assume they're guilty of something, that they've transgressed. The power lies with me, even though it often feels otherwise. I would do well to remember this. No, of course, it just seems time to help you make the transition from this hospital job to a job in town. The procedure for work placements is for the patient to take an outside job and continue to sleep at the hospital until he's adjusted well enough to his new circumstances to live away from the hospital environment. It's acclimatization by degrees. What sort of job would you like to have? I ask. Rusty Kirk looks around the room. I'd probably be all right at cutting cloth, he says. No, not here. If you have any job, a job not in the hospital, what would that be? Rusty knits his brow together in a thoughtful scowl. I wouldn't mind being a race car driver, he says. Oh, you like cars then? Yes. What about working as a mechanic's helper? Rusty looks up at me as though I'm an idiot. That's not being a race car driver, he says. That's not driving a race car. You have to start somewhere. You can't start by being a race car driver. But you asked me what job I wanted. Well, I said it the wrong way round. The question now is, would you like to work with cars? I suppose so, says Rusty grudgingly. But that wasn't the question a moment ago. My exchange with Rusty Kirk is turning out like all my other exchanges with the patients at the Weyburn. But I refuse to be defeated this time. There's too much at stake for me to back down. All right, then, I say. I'll make some inquiries, and I'll be by later to let you know what I found. I turn and walk away from Rusty before he's able to protest again about it not being possible for him to be a race car driver. I spent the morning making phone calls, and after lunch I go back into the mattress factory to collect Rusty Kirk. I've lined up an interview for you, I say, at Scully's garage. We'll go over there now, and I'll bring you back in time for supper. Rusty Kirk rather reluctantly gets up from his sewing machine and follows me out of the shop. I can feel someone watching us, and when I turn at the door, I see Henry Tudor staring at me. We take a taxi to Scully's garage. Tom Scully meets us outside, and we all shake hands by the pyramid of oil cans stacked between the gas pumps. I've had the mentals before, Scully says to me. They're good workers. Boy, he says to Rusty, even though they're about the same age. Do you think you could pump gas and check oil? Sure. And sweep the garage floor and put the tools back where they came from at the end of the day? Tom Scully leads us into the mechanics bays and shows us a pegboard wall where the tools are hung. In the spaces where the tools are missing, there are drawn outlines of wrenches or saws or hammers that used to occupy these spots. That's clever, says Rusty. You could do that? Asks Tom Scully. Sure. Rusty seems more childlike, more defenseless and obedient out of the hospital setting. Job's yours then, says Tom Scully to Rusty. To me, he says, I'll have to pay him a little less for the favor I'm doing you. Before I call for the taxi to drive us back to the hospital, I take Rusty for a coffee and a piece of pie at the restaurant across the road from Scully's garage. Do you think you'll be all right there? I ask Rusty as we're standing at the pastry case choosing our pies. Mr. Scully seems like a nice man. Nice enough, I suppose. He doesn't seem nice to me at all. He seems a man who's on to a good scheme and knows it. But if he gives you any trouble at all, you're to see me about it, understand? Do you think I could have the lemon meringue? Says Rusty. I like how high it is. We sit at the counter on the red vinyl stools that turn right around and eat our pie and drink our coffee. Why are you at the Weyburn, I ask. There were too many of us. Someone had to go. Rusty takes an enormous forkful of pie. Daddy said I wasn't right in the head and I should go into the bug house. Be one of the bugs in the bug house. He shovels the pie into his mouth and tries to say something else with his mouth full of meringue. What? Boys eat too much, that's what Daddy said. How long have you been inside? Since I was 8. Probably there was not much wrong with Rusty Kirk before he was put into the mental hospital. 30-odd years of living as a mental defective have transformed him into one. Now he'll pump gas and sweep out the greasy floors of the mechanics bays for the rest of his life. Now he'll be cheap labor for a man like Tom Scully. The injustice of this rises in me like bile, leaving a sour taste at the back of my throat. Would you like another piece of pie? I ask. Rusty, with his mouth full of the first piece, nods, and I wave the waitress over to give him another slice. Hi, Mum. It's me again. So it is January the 2nd. Reading like crazy here today, so a good day to read. Back at it. Luke Christensen appears at my office door looking more official than usual, carrying a clipboard, his breast pocket bristling with pens. Flint, he says, lead me through your kingdom. I don't really have a plan for how I'm going to make the morning unfold in a satisfactory manner, but thank God I do have a place to start. Let's go to the mattress factory, sir, I say. There's someone I want you to meet there. I fold up the piece of paper with my false results on it and jam it into my lab coat pocket, in case I need it as a backup. We head outside, down the path behind the hospital, push open the doors to the mattress factory, and hear immediately the faint whine of a sewing machine. I ignore the supervisor who's waving at me from his office and lead Dr. Christensen down the rows of sewing machines to Rusty Kirk. My plan is to introduce them and to explain to Dr. Christensen how Rusty Kirk is to go to work in the automotive garage starting next week. I'd hoped there would be some discussion between them, that Dr. Christensen would question Rusty as to his new job, would express his enthusiasm for the venture. I'd hoped to actually waste a substantial portion of the morning showing off Rusty Kirk, because I have no other recruits to present to Dr. Christensen. But none of this happened. What happens instead is that the supervisor, having given up on trying to wave me into his office, chases me down the row of sewing machines and catches me where Dr. Christensen and I stopped in front of Rusty Kirk. I've been trying to find you, Dr. Flint, he says. I've been trying to track you down. We've got a problem. That's exactly what I don't need to hear. What sort of problem? I ask nervously. I can feel Dr. Christensen snap to attention beside me at the mention of the word problem. Henry Tudor's gone missing. He's run away. It seems that Henry Tudor's been absent since yesterday after supper. Supervisor did try to find me to tell me this, but couldn't locate me in the dining room on the ward where I was meant to be. I was at the time sitting out with Rabbitfoot Bill in the stables, watching him eat his dinner, trying to calm him down from his agitated state. Henry Tudor is a pyromaniac, said Dr. Christensen. It's not good to have his whereabouts unknown. Not good at all. It's downright dangerous, in fact, says the supervisor. They both look at me. It doesn't seem worthwhile to try to defend myself. I'm in the wrong. It's probably my fault that Henry has gone missing. It's certainly my fault that he's been missing for so long without anybody really knowing about it. I listened to Dr. Christensen and the supervisor discuss whether or not the police should be called, as though I was not there, standing between them. Rusty Kirk, I notice, has gone back to his sewing, even though Dr. Christensen and the supervisor are talking right over the top of his head. When the discussions have ended and it has been decided that the police should indeed be called and that there should be a search of the hospital buildings and grounds by the staff, Dr. Christensen and I walk back outside. The moment the mattress factory doors close behind us, he lets me have it. What is wrong with you, Flint? He says, the anger in his voice palpable, spitting the words out at me. How could you let something like this happen? I don't know, sir. But I do know. I just can't say. I can't tell him about Bill. I must keep that to myself. The way I've been conducting myself with Bill would be an even greater transgression than a missing person. I had my concerns about you from the start, says Dr. Christensen, but I always gave you the benefit of the doubt. I thought you were just young and inexperienced, that I could mold you, that working in a place this size could be overwhelming, but you'd step up to the job. I thought the job would make you a good doctor out of you, but obviously I was wrong. He runs his hand through his hair, and I notice that his hand is shaking. I'm sorry, I say. I'm overwhelmed by everything. I don't think I'm a good doctor. No, you're not, said Dr. Christensen. Henry Tudor was your patient. You've let him down and possibly put his life in danger and the lives of people in the hospital and the community. He's not a stable man. What if he sets a fire? What if he hurts someone? I'll look for him. I won't stop looking until I've found him. Not good enough. Luke Christensen lowers his clipboard, which he's been holding up against his chest like a shield. I'll have to let you go, Leonard. I can't have you remaining in a position of responsibility over my patients. It's not safe. I had expected a reprimand, a stiff warning, but I hadn't expected to be fired. It shocks me to think I might have to leave here, and my first thought is, I can't go. I can't leave Bill. Please, sir, I say, just give me another chance. Let me prove to you that I can do this job. Too late, says Christensen. I want you out of here. He realizes the harshness of his last remark, and his face softens. It's too bad, Leonard, he says. I didn't think you were someone who required a paternal hand. I thought you were old enough not to need fatherly strictness. But I can see that I should have been harder on you. I should have given you more supervision. Your failure is also my failure, and letting you go gives me no satisfaction. I wander around my hospital ward in a daze. Most of the men are out working, and there are only a few in the sitting room, playing board games, leafing through magazines. It all looks so benign. I can't believe I couldn't handle my job here. I can't believe that I've been given the weekend to gather my things together, and I'm expected to leave on Monday morning. What on earth am I going to do? The men who are on the ward look up as I wander past, their faces registering suspicion and only occasionally recognition. One of them says hello to me, and one of them waves. I haven't helped them at all. I haven't done a single good thing for anyone since I've been here. My failure is not Dr. Christensen's failure. It's entirely my own. William Scott is in his office when I go to say goodbye. I'm leaving, I say from the doorway. I've been fired. I've come to say goodbye. What? I'm a terrible doctor. I don't know why Dr. Christensen ever hired me in the first place. But then I remember what he said about thinking he could mold me. The experiments were the important thing, and Luke Christensen surrounded himself with doctors who would easily go along with what he was doing. I was young, inexperienced, easily malleable. William Scott believed in emancipation, and the LSD experiments could be posited that way, as being about freedom. I don't know the other doctors well, but my guess is that they would all have traits that mesh with Luke Christensen's professional ambitions. I feel now that I've perhaps been equally used by both husband and wife. Why would you be fired? Asked William. You haven't even been here a season. You must still be on your probationary period. I lost Henry Tudor, or Henry Tudor became lost under my care. He's a pyromaniac and unstable. This whole place could go up in flames any minute. Jesus, William takes off his glasses and puts them down on his desk. It's serious business to lose a patient. A fireable offense, I say, apparently. No pun intended. Maybe you could find him. Maybe if you found him, Christensen wouldn't let you go. Do you think so? I should look for Henry Tudor. I said I would. But I don't really know the man at all and have no sense of where he would go. Yes, if you were able to find him, then Christensen might change his mind about letting you go. But where would I start? The ward. It's where he lives. His dormitory room. Use your imagination. Don't give up, Leonard. It seems unreal to me, the fact that I failed so miserably in my job, and that I've been fired, that I will have to leave this place I have barely arrived at, that I will have to leave Bill. This last thought sends a chill through me. How can I be parted from Bill? It was hard enough the first time. It seems impossible now that we've been reunited and are close again. I leave William's office and head for the dormitory. But when I pass the nurse's station at the end of the hall, I have an idea. I have seen how LSD can open up someone's thoughts. How can it help patients? Could it not also open up my thoughts and help me in my search for Henry Tudor? Could it not unlock my imagination and make it obvious where my missing patient has gone? If I can find Henry, then perhaps everything can be reversed, and I'll not have to be separated from Bill. It's easy to get the nurse on duty to open the drug cabinet for me. It's too soon yet for anyone to know about my being fired. The nurse just assumes all is as it should be. I don't remember the exact dosage that patients are given, so I just approximate. I shake some of the liquid LSD into a glass of water, drink it, then go to my office and sit at my desk, waiting for the drug to take effect. The wind is up and there are clouds whipping past above my head as I walk down the path from the hospital. I look for Henry Tudor by the fence, through the trees bordering the field, under an overturned wheelbarrow. I imagine him as suddenly small, no bigger than a matchstick, hiding in all manner of places. Makes me smile to think of him as a matchstick. If I found him when he was this small, I could just slip him up. I could just slip him inside my coat pocket. Henry's not under the rock my shoe turns over. He's not sitting on top of the dandelion on the side of the road. He's not perched on the back of the bird that flies past my head. He's nowhere and everywhere all at once. I can hear the sound of his matchstick head striking when the wind blows against my coat. I can smell the burning of his matchstick body in the dry grasses that border the cinder path. What if the fire catches and runs all the way to the barn? Bill, Bill! I come bursting through the stable door, all nerves and feeling. But the stables are completely empty. There's not even a horse left in the building. I go towards Bill's stall, thinking that I'll just wait for him there, but all of a sudden my legs are very heavy and walking becomes difficult. I'm wading through mud. The effort is that great to pull each foot up and then plant it back down again. I don't get further than the bales of hay stacked up against the wall opposite the stalls. Even sinking down to the ground feels like a supreme effort, and it seems to take hours before I'm sitting down. It's as though each of my movements has become elastic, just keeps stretching farther and farther out endlessly, and I'm hopelessly chasing after myself in an effort to catch up to what I'm doing. The straw scattered on the floor around my boots appears to be the most splendid gold, each piece shimmering as brilliantly as a needle of gold. I pass my hand over the top of it and can see the gold glowing through my skin. Why did I never notice such riches before? Why couldn't I see the glory that was all around me? I move my leg slowly, and the straw shifts and glistens, pulls back into a small wave of gold. I move my leg again, and the wave subsides. I don't know how long I do this for, playing with the straw, sit on the floor by the wall of bales. I don't seem to have a sense of time anymore, and I can't understand it in the old way that I used to understand it. It seems foolish to think I once believed in the regular march of hours. This version of time doesn't move relentlessly along, but billows and collapses. It's not linear, but something that surrounds me. I don't know how long I'm in the stables before Bill comes back. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours, but I hear the drums of the horses' hooves as the team of Percherons enters the building. I want to shout out to Bill as I did before, but it seems to take tremendous effort just to open my mouth. And after I do that, I'm not sure how to let the words out from between the bars of my teeth. The horses see me before Bill does. One of them makes a magnificent snort and shakes his head. Another stamps his foot. I can feel the weight of his foot coming down on the boards as a tiny buzzing all through my body. It's like there are bees in the earth, the whole colony of bees in the earth. Bill is behind the horses, guiding them forward into their stalls. He seems to glow as he walks, shedding light, and I realize that he is golden, just like the straw. "Dr. Lenny," he says when he sees me, "are you hurt?" Seems a funny thing for him to say, and I start to laugh and then can't stop. It's like my laughter's a machine that turns itself on, goes faster and faster. I can't get off, and it's getting hard to breathe, and all of a sudden I'm afraid. Bill is suddenly on the floor beside me. I think later about how he knew instinctively what to do. At first I think how remarkable that was, but later it occurs to me that it was simply what he knew. Bill knew madness. He knew the forms it took. He recognized its face. He struggled with the idea of normalcy, with fitting into the world where he didn't belong. But he understood madness. It was his familiar. Bill gets down on the floor beside me and puts his arms around me. I cower inside the cave of him. I'm sobbing now. I'm not sure when the change happened, when my laughter turned to tears, but the sobs ripped through my body, each one seeming to fracture more of me. I'm afraid there'll be nothing left. I'm afraid I'll be destroyed by my own terrifying sadness. "Save me," I say to Bill, and he tightens his arms around me. I can smell the horses and the outdoors on his skin. I can feel the cage of his ribs and the scratchy surface of his overalls against my cheek. He mumbles something, but I can't make out the words. There's a moment when I hang there in the space between terror and safety, perfectly balanced between those two states, and then everything tips over into terror. I hear the noise, but I don't know what it is. When I look up, I see the creature bearing down on us. It's a monster. It's black and drips blackness like it's crawled out of the bottom of a swamp. It's a swamp monster and has trouble walking on dry land. Does a sort of monster shuffle towards me. I scream, and I don't stop screaming. The monster doesn't slow down, just keeps advancing towards me, and I scream all the louder. Bill jumps up, and I see him reach for something and throw it at the monster. The monster sways a little on his feet and then crashes to the floor and disappears. When I wake up, I'm lying on Bill's bed. He must have carried me in from the main room of the stable and laid me down. I can hear him throwing hay in for the horses. I can hear the swish of the hay and the scrape of the fork as it hits the wood of the stalls. I look around. Everything seems to have returned to normal speed. I look at my hand. It doesn't seem remarkable. I move my head. It's easy to do. "Hello," I say, and the word comes out without effort. I struggle up to a sitting position. "Hey, no, Penny. It's okay. It's okay." She doesn't like it when I say hello. She thinks that's somebody. "Okay, that's enough. Penny. Leave it. Leave it. Leave it." Bad girl. Penny. Leave it. "Hey. Listen. Shh, that's enough." Oh, she won't listen. Lucky she's so cute. "Hey, that's enough." Oh, she is so bad. "Are you done?" "Penny." "Hey, enough." "Penny, that's enough. That's enough. Leave it." I struggle up to a sitting position, swing my legs over the side of the cot, and stand up. I walk to the stall door and open it. Bill has respectfully latched it to give me privacy and quiet. I walk out into the stable and I see the body on the floor by the hay bales. It's Henry Tudor. He's lying on his back. There's a great deal of blood on his shirt, and when I kneel down to check his breathing, I can see that there are 4 holes in his chest. He's lying perfectly still. I put my shaking hand against his neck to search for a pulse, and there isn't one. My head has a sudden sharp pain in it, and I feel as though I'm about to vomit. I find Bill inside the nearest stall. "Penny, stop it." He swings the pitchfork down to push more hay into the enclosure. He has his back to me. He's tossing the straw into the stalls with a rhythm that's the same as the way field grasses bend to wind, or the way a flame dips and sways, as graceful as a dancer. "Bill," I said. My voice comes out as a whisper. "Bill, what have you done?" "Henry Tudor's dead." Bill turns around and smiles at me. Lenny, you were sick, but now you're better. I take him by the arm and turn him so he faces the body of Henry Tudor. I can see the blood on the straw where it's been spread out for the horse. I can see blood on the tines of the pitchfork Bill has been using. You've killed him. He's dead. You've killed him. Bill nods solemnly and then turns back to his work. He had it coming to him, he says. So the next chapter, we're still in Weyburn, but and it's 1960. So this is after Lenny leaves the hospital, after he's fired and he leaves the hospital. William Scott meets me in town. He comes to the apartment where I live above the restaurant. This has been our arrangement since I was fired from the Weyburn Mental Hospital. William wants to help me, but he can't let it be known to anyone at the hospital that he's helping me. I've left there in disgrace. No one wants me to come back. Not only did I lose a patient, but I then became inadvertently responsible for his death. No greater level of incompetence is possible in someone who's taken the Hippocratic Oath. William and I have decided to do this without LSD, all things considered, the old-fashioned way. He comes to the apartment 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Comes from work after dinner at the hospital ward, arriving around 9 p.m. and stays until 11. He borrows Dr. Mortimer's car to drive the small distance into town and waves away my attempts at payment, even though I bring it up every session. I made my mistakes well at the Weyburn, but for all I did wrong, it seems that maybe I did one thing right. I made a real friend there. I always leave the apartment door unlocked on those evenings that William Scott comes to see me. I like to sit on the battered old sofa by the window and listen, first for the sound of the car engine shutting off, and then for his footsteps up the stairs. He has a light tread, as though it's nothing for him to walk up several flights of stairs, so he has all the energy in the world. Tonight, a Wednesday, he arrives exactly at 9. I hear the soft tap of his feet approaching the apartment, then the squeak of the doorknob turning in its socket. Hello, he says cheerfully, entering the apartment. This is another thing that I've come to rely on from William Scott, now that I know him better. He's always in a good mood. He's always tremendously upbeat. In this way, I can see how he'd be a good doctor. Simply being around him would make anyone feel better. I get up from the sofa and go shake his hand. This is how we greet each other and how we say goodbye. The formality of it always makes me feel happy. William means to get to the bottom of my obsession with Bill. That's his term for it, obsession, and I can't say that he's wrong. Even now, I'm still anxious to know how Bill is, after he was returned to the penitentiary. Occasionally, I ask William Scott to find out, to call the prison and ask after Bill's condition, but he always refuses. He says it would just complicate things, that my problem has always been linked to knowing Bill, and I should know enough not to want to continue this pattern. He believes, although he never comes out and says it directly, that I was abused as a boy by Bill. We've been at this for several months now. After I was fired from the Weyburn, I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go back to Montreal. I couldn't return to my parents' home in Canwood. I couldn't even tell them that I'd failed at my first and perhaps only job as a psychiatrist. They'd been so proud of me when I got accepted into medical school, even though I didn't become what my father called a real doctor. At the inquest, there was a suggestion that I might face criminal charges for my part in Henry Tudor's death. But Bill had killed before, and it was more convenient for Dr. Christensen to speak to that, to blame him entirely, and save any scrutiny of his leadership or of his drug experiments. Christensen testified that I was trying to stop Bill from killing Tudor, and I got off. A lucky break, he said to me afterwards, a second chance. But nothing about it felt lucky, and as for a second chance after the inquest, I stayed in town, picked up a job as a dishwasher at a restaurant, and rented this small apartment upstairs. I asked William Scott for help, and he agreed, and I will stay here in Weyburn until he says that I'm ready to leave, ready to go back into the larger world, until he pronounces me cured, or cured enough. We sit at the kitchen table. I pour us both a glass of water. William spreads out his papers, uncaps his ballpoint pen. There's never much small talk between us. This is not a social visit. Time is limited, so we get right to the point. What I still don't understand, says William, is your unshakable attachment to Bill. It's almost certain he abused you. But if he did abuse me, why do I feel no fear towards him? I've lain awake nights thinking this very thing. It makes sense that Bill abused me. There was something not right about our relationship. I think I always knew that. But surely if he had abused me, I would have felt afraid of him. And at some point I would have remembered something of the abuse. A strange, sympathetic response, says William. You identified with your captor. Perhaps. I certainly did empathize with him. His feelings were my feelings. You saw yourself as somehow complicit in your abuse. But I don't have any memories of Bill abusing me. I just don't believe that he did. Why were you so taken with him? I liked his free spirit. I liked how he lived. It was romantic to a young boy. I admire how he behaved around people. He was a sociopath, said William, and he suffered periodic bouts of psychosis. Sometimes I hate the labels we're meant to attach to people. It seems so bogus and actually explains nothing of who they are. He just didn't give a damn didn't give a damn what anyone thought of him, I said. He was true to himself. Something suddenly occurs to me. I think I even admired the murder, the first one, the killing of Sam Monroe. Why? It was done so recklessly and absolutely. Murder often is, says William dryly. It's an impulsive act, I say. Murder is the logical reach of impulse. I think I can relate to the desire to follow impulse to its conclusion. But you've never expressed a desire to kill anyone yourself. But I'm a little impulsive myself, and I think that given the right circumstances, I could act as Bill acted. You could be Bill? Yes. You wanted to be Bill? Yes. William Scott considers for a moment. That's all well and good, but it still doesn't entirely explain the attraction. There was no one like Bill. I came from a series of small prairie towns. There was no one as exciting as Bill. He cut a very dramatic figure to a young boy such as myself. I got to take a break. A little darker in here this morning. I do have the same shirt on today. I really just realized. It's 10 after 9, so it's earlier for me to get out here and get the fire going and start reading. So, good morning, Mom. Where we left off. All right, says William, I'm willing to see the attraction when you were a boy. But what about when you're a man? What about when you were a working doctor and you neglected your duties because you were still in thrall to this Bill? How do you explain that? I can't explain it. I loved him, I say. But this was not a harmless sort of love, says William. This was an obsessive love that caused a great deal of damage to you and to those around you. This was a love that resulted in murder. It was worse for Bill, I say. He was incarcerated, all liberties suspended. I was reprimanded and allowed to go on with my life. I feel terrible about this and guilty for my part in it. Bill was trying to protect me, and now he'll be locked up forever in prison. He was the one who killed. He should have been punished for the act. It is illegal to murder someone. But it was my fault he did murder. You're protecting him again, says William. Why do you continue to do this? I love him, I say. William leans forward. You didn't use the past tense, he says. Just then you said love. Bill is gone. He's in prison. Never to return to your world. It's over. But it's not, I say. It's not over. That's the trouble. Describe this love to me. What about it? How it felt to you back then. I lean back in the chair and look at the apartment ceiling. There's a large water stain near the window, flaking bits of plaster above my small stove. Sometimes when I'm cooking, the scale of plaster fall off the ceiling and into my frying pan. I felt like I wanted to give myself away to Bill. I wanted to surrender myself to him, to be taken and not returned. I wanted to be free of myself and fall out of the shape of my life. Why did you want to be free of yourself? What are you trying to be free of? I think hard. I open myself up to my own subconscious and nothing occurs to me. I don't know. I feel we're close, says William, but whenever I sense we're getting somewhere, you shut down. I know. Why? I can't answer that. Tell me about your relationship with your father, he says. I know what he's doing. He's found the door bolted and now he's walking around the building looking for an open window. It wasn't a close relationship, I say. He worked long hours. I didn't see all that much of him. I was closer to my mother. But you must remember something of the nature of your relationship with him. What sort of things did you do together when you were able to spend time with him? I remember the noises of my father, the slam of the door when he came in for supper, The way his sneeze sounded like the bray of a donkey, the reverberations on the kitchen table from the heft of his fist coming down. He was a hard man, I say. He was an angry man. He had to deal with the public in his job, and he didn't really like people. So he was often angry at the end of the day when I would see him. Mostly he ignored me, I think, but I do remember that he would sometimes play catch with me. He did teach me how to whittle. Once we made a wooden flute together. Later, my father snapped the flute in one of his tempers. He snapped the flute and threw it in the fireplace. Just good for kindling, he said. And at that time, I thought he meant me. So, Bill became the father you never had. Yes, I suppose so. But you choose a man to have a relationship with who didn't know how to relate to people. Who chose to take himself out of human society because he couldn't deal with emotional relationships. But I was just a boy. I couldn't have known this. To a boy, he was a very romantic figure, and he really seemed to care for me. He killed for you, said William. I suppose that's about as caring as you can get. But the relationship, although possibly good for you, wasn't good for him, was it? This is what I find so hard to live with. How bad I was for Bill, how good he was to me. No, it wasn't. So why didn't you leave him alone when you knew he was getting dependent on you at the hospital? When he was waiting to eat when you did, when he was becoming rather childishly attached to you. I wanted him. And what was this wanting? Was it sexual? Was it paternal? Did you want to take care of him? Did you want him to take care of you? I can still see Bill sitting on the edge of the bed in the stables at the Weyburn. I can see his handsome face and the shock of black hair that he pushed back with the same fierce swipe that he used to brush a horse's mane. It was everything all at once. He was everything, as a boy and then now as a man. Loving him made me love everything else that much more. The song of a bird, the cool strength of the river on my skin, all of it. Because of loving Bill, I loved the world with an intensity I haven't felt since. I stopped for a moment, remembering how excited I felt all day at the hospital, thinking I would see Bill that evening, when I would rush off to the stables at every opportunity. It wasn't that I loved the world, I said. It was more that loving Bill made me able to bear the world. Hey, Mom. So the next chapter is back in Canwood in 1947. And this chapter is actually, it recounts the trial of Bill when he killed the little boy. It's a good story. The trial is the biggest thing that's ever happened in this town. It's all anybody talks about, how Bill killed the poor boy and then went back to cutting the hedge, as though it was nothing. I'm too young to be a trial witness, but the police take a long statement from me, sometimes asking the same questions over and over again. What exactly was said between the victim and the accused? Did you see William Dunn push the garden shears into the chest of Sam Monroe? It turns out there was another witness to the murder, an adult, so there was less emphasis placed on my account. The other witness is a man living across the street from Mrs. Odegaard, who was on his way to the pharmacy and had just stepped out his front door when Sam confronted Bill. He couldn't hear the taunts from Sam, but he did see Bill plunge the clippers into Sam's chest and then pull them out again and continue with his work. It's this detail, the calm extraction of the shears from Sam Monroe's chest, that has set everyone firmly against Bill. Why didn't you go for help right away? Why didn't I go for help right away? I stood there, watching the blood crawl across the dirt. At some point I must have dropped the water glass because there were shards of it around my shoes, like pieces of ice from a frozen pond. I remember thinking of that, of walking out over the ice in winter, of a landscape and a person and a season far removed from this one. When I finally could speak after what seemed like ages, with just the snick of the clippers as the only sound around me, I said, "Bill, I think he's dead. I think you've killed him." I know I should have run right away for the police or the doctor. I know I should have acted quicker. I don't think I could have stopped Bill from killing Sam. He moved too fast and it happened so swiftly. But I could have acted quicker afterwards. But when Bill said those words, he had it coming to him. All I could think of was how right he was. Sam Monroe was a bully, and he deserved to be treated as badly as he'd treated me. Now he couldn't hurt me anymore. I was glad he was dead. So I didn't run for help when it first happened. I only went for the police after the man across the street yelled at me to do so. But I couldn't explain this when they questioned me. I just said I was too frightened to move, and they believed this. They must have known that I was in shock, and perhaps, too, they thought that I was frightened of being killed by Bill, that if he murdered one boy, he might be about murdering a second. That would be what they wanted to believe. I couldn't tell them that Bill had done it for me. When the police questioned me, I wanted to leave out the part where Bill pulled the clippers from the chest of Sam Monroe and set to using them again. Although it made a certain sense to me, knowing Bill as I did, I knew that it would go against him. The police couldn't understand that Bill had to finish the job. He was a hard worker, and he liked to work straight through, start at the beginning and end at the end, with no breaks in between. This is partly why I took the water out to him, because he couldn't stop what he was doing long enough to fetch it himself, even if he was thirsty. I couldn't leave out the part about the shears being removed from the body because the man on his way to the pharmacy had seen it, and the police used him as the main witness in the trial. My statement was just meant to support his testimony. Callous is what the paper said about that action. He showed a callous disregard for human life. My father read this out at the dinner table. He liked to read out the details of the trial, not aware that I knew them already, that I had been there in the courtroom every day. He knew that I had witnessed the murder, and he was there when I gave my statement to the police, but he didn't know about my long association with Bill, and thought that I hadn't really been affected by the murder. He always ascribed to me a toughness that I never really possessed. My father had forbidden me from going to the actual trial, but he couldn't really keep me away. The courthouse was packed. Everyone in town was there, and even though children weren't allowed in, my mother's friend Lucy Weber took pity on me and snuck me in with her. I think she thought that I had been so upset at my young friend's death that it would be good for me to see the murderer brought to justice. The trial took 3 days. On the first day, they called the lead witness, the man from across the street, from Mrs. Odegaard's, who'd been on his way to the pharmacy. "Did you see the accused strike the victim?" "I did." "Where did he strike him?" "In the chest. Show the court, if you will, Mr. Melville, where the accused struck the victim exactly." There was a murmur in the room when Mr. Melville touched his shirt with his hand right above where his heart was beating. "Did the accused strike the victim in the heart, Mr. Melville?" "Yes, sir." "And with what did he strike him?" "A pair of shears." "Such as one would use for trimming a hedge?" "Yes, sir, he was trimming a hedge, sir." "And do you recognize these as being the shears?" There's a gasp when the clippers are held up for Mr. Melville to identify. Lucy Weber squeezes my hand in excitement or sympathy. I can't quite tell what it is she's feeling on my behalf. Mr. Melville sways slightly when he sees the clippers, as though he's about to faint. He's a fat man. I can see, even from far back in the room as Lucy and I are sitting, that his shirt is too tight across his chest. I imagine the clippers embedded in that fat chest, and I wriggle a little on the bench thinking about this. It's hot in the courtroom, and the back of my legs are sticking to the wood of the bench. Lucy grips my hand again. Perhaps she thinks that the sight of the clippers has put the fear into me. "Yes, sir, those look like the same shears." "The same shears that the accused used to strike the victim, Sam Monroe, in the chest?" "Yes, sir." It goes on all afternoon like this, each question tightening around Bill, cutting deeper into his flesh and sinew, getting closer to the bone. He sits at a wooden table on the left side of the court with his back to the audience. He's wearing a borrowed blue suit, and he sits up very straight. If I crane my neck around the woman in front of me, and I can see the back of his head, his thick black hair brushed down for the occasion of his murder trial. At the end of the first day, Bill is led out, returned to his prison cell. He shuffles along the floor like an old person, and then I realize that he's wearing leg irons. I stand up to get a better look and see the 2 cuffs of steel around his ankles and the short piece of chain running between them. I want to wave to Bill or cry out, but he has his head bent, watching the shuffle of his feet across the courtroom floor. He's probably never had his feet in a trap before, and he's nervous about how he moves. I don't want to disturb his concentration, so I watch him leave the room, a policeman at each elbow, without letting him know I'm here. On the second day, the town doctor is called to the stand to testify. "Did you examine the body?" "I did." "Can you tell the court the nature of the wound that killed Sam Monroe?" The left coronary artery had been completely severed. It had been completely severed about 1.5 inches from origin. "Was this a deep wound then?" "Yes, it was 4 inches deep." "A wound caused by the use of considerable force?" "Yes." The Crown Prosecutor holds up the garden shears. In your opinion, could the wound have been caused by this pair of garden shears? Yes. On examination of the deceased, was this wound the only thing wrong, medically speaking? Some of his organs registered acute shock due to the hemorrhage, which was due to the wound. That is correct. To what do you attribute as the cause of this boy's death? Shock caused by fatal hemorrhage. And what did you determine to be the exact cause of death? Arterial hemorrhage caused by a stab wound to the heart. On this second day, Lucy Weber and I are closer to the front of the room. When the prosecutor holds up the clippers, I can see the worn wooden handles polished smooth by the hands of all the people who'd worked them. I can see the dark start of grease on the spring clip near the handle, and a scrape of what looks like dirt on the blades. Blood. It must be blood, not dirt. You were one of the first to reach the body. Is this correct, Doctor? It is, yes. Who was at the site of the body when you arrived? The police constable, Mr. Melville, and the boy who had come to fetch me. The boy first went to fetch the constable and then you. Is that correct? It is. The prosecutor turns to the judge and addresses him for a moment. The boy in question is one Leonard Flint. We have his statement on record and it supports Mr. Melville's testimony. I hereby submit it as evidence. That's you, whispers Lucy Webster, as though I needed help recognizing my own name. I wish the prosecutor hadn't said that about my statement being the same as fat Mr. Melville's. I didn't want Bill to think that I turned on him, because I didn't. I just answered what they asked me, but if they hadn't asked me, I wouldn't have told anyone anything. If Mr. Melville hadn't yelled from across the street at me to get help, I might have gone back inside and poured that second glass of water for Bill. Was the boy dead when you arrived, Doctor? Yes. For a moment it seemed they were talking about me. I looked at the back of Bill's neck. There was a crease of dirt in his skin above his shirt collar, and I can tell by the height and hunch of his shoulders that he's holding them up to protect himself, as though he's expecting blows. I want to climb over all the dull and stupid people in front of me and hurl myself onto his back. I want to wrap my arms tight around him and bury my face into the curve of his skin where his neck meets his collarbone. And I want to breathe in the sharp saltiness of him. I want to feel safe again, just one last time. At home at night, my parents talk of nothing but the trial. My mother feels sorry for Sam and Rose's parents, and my father wishes that Bill would hang for what he's done. After supper, my father doesn't go onto the porch to smoke, but lingers around the kitchen while my mother washes the dishes. He likes to have me recount the murder over and over again, until he tires of this and I can excuse myself and go do homework in my room. I'm lucky that his job at the train station makes it impossible for him to attend the trial. And I'm lucky, too, that my mother feels so disturbed by Sam's violent death that to go to the courthouse would just be too upsetting. She relies on Lucy Weber's recounting of events at the end of each day to keep her informed. From my bedroom, I can hear my parents talking down the hall. My father likes to retell my version of the murder and then pronounce on it. Every time he gets to the part about Bill stabbing Sam in the heart with the shears, my mother says, "Don't, please don't," as though he's about to raise the shears himself and plunge them through the wall of her chest. On the third and last day of the trial, Bill is called to take the stand. There's nothing worse for a man who doesn't like to talk than being made to do so, and I cringe when I see how nervous Bill is inside the little wooden box. He keeps darting his head from side to side and pulling on the collar of his board suit. All the nervous movement makes him look crazy. Lucy Weber and I are sitting in the third row. We got here early and lined up outside to get a good seat. This is the final day of the trial and the courtroom is filled. This is the day when the judgment is meant to be coming down and no one wants to miss it. The witness box is raised up on a little stage behind the judge's bench. I have a good view of Bill. I don't like how scared he seems, how he fidgets inside the suit like he's got the pox. He looks so guilty, says Lucy. He's going all twitchy with it. The prosecutor raises to his feet. William Dunn, can you recount for the court what happened on the afternoon of June 17th? Bill just looks nervously about. It's like he doesn't know they're talking to him, that they expect an answer from him. Please answer the question, Mr. Dunn. What? Where were you on the afternoon of June 17th? Cutting the hedge for Mrs. Odegaard. Were you alone? Yes. I like that Bill is protecting me, although it's pointless as the judge already knows from my statement that I was there. Mr. Dunn, there was a boy there too, was there not? No. One Leonard Flint? Nope. Everyone knows Bill's lying. Parts of my statement have been read out to the court. People have heard the testimony of Mr. Melville, who recounted seeing me standing by the hedge talking to Bill. I dig my nails into my wrist to prevent myself from crying out for Bill to stop lying. It's making everything worse for him if he denies what everyone else knows to be true. The prosecutor waves his hands in exasperation as though he's dismissing Bill entirely. Did you kill Sam Monroe? Bill has his head bowed and is mumbling something. I can't hear you, Mr. Dunn. There's more mumbling. What? Bill suddenly raises his head and looks out at the prosecutor. His fidgeting has stopped. He's angry now. I can tell that he's angry now because he has a calmness and strength about him. He had it coming to him, he says. After that, it's all over for Bill. It's the last clear thing he says, and he just keeps on saying it. No matter what else the prosecutor asks him, all he answers is that Sam had it coming to him. There really is nothing else to do but find him guilty. He is guilty. I have to keep myself reminding myself that he is guilty because I just feel so sorry for him up on the stand getting pestered with all the lawyer questions. The verdict is manslaughter, and the sentence is life at the Prince Albert Penitentiary. Well, that's justice done, said Lucy Weber, snapping the clip on her purse shut with satisfaction. Everyone is on their feet preparing to leave the courthouse. I can't see for all the moving arms and legs, and I am frantic to find Bill before he's taken from the room. I burst through the people in front of me, climb up on the benches and down again until I'm on the floor of the courtroom, right in front of Bill and the two policemen who are preparing to lead him out of the room. Bill, I say, and I rush forward to touch him, but one of the policemen swats me back. Bill looks down at me. He has a wild look in his eyes, wild and unfocused, like he's been out in the sun all day, and has suddenly come indoors and can't adjust to the change in light. I want to tell him not to worry, but that's stupid. I want him to tell me not to worry, but that's stupider still. I strain against the barrier of the policeman's arm, and all of a sudden, Bill's eyes clear and he looks at me like he knows me. See to my dogs, he says. Will you go and see to my dogs? I will. The policemen have started Bill moving again, and I call out to him when he's at the door of the courthouse. I'll take care of the dogs, Bill. I'll look after them. Don't worry. You don't have to worry. Bill turns when he hears me yelling this, and he nods his head to show he's understood me, that he trusts I will do as he needs me to do. Then he's pushed through the door. The last I see him is the slope of one blue-suited shoulder as he's jostled out of the courtroom and into the hallway. Lucy Weber comes to my house that night to tell my mother about the final day of the trial. They sit out together on the porch drinking iced tea. I try to sit with them for a while, but my mother banishes me to my bedroom. You've had enough of this, she says. It's too much for a child. I lie in my bed listening to the flutter of their voices through the wall. I can't hear the words, but the murmur is comforting, like wind through the prairie grass. My father is gone. He's visiting another station master farther up the line and won't be home for a day or so. He likes to say that these visits are about his work, but Mother tells me the truth, that he likes to go away from home so he can drink without guilt. He always comes back nicer than when he left, so we never mind his absences. After a while, I can hear the creak of the porch chairs as the women get up from them, the click of the screen door, and one set of footsteps inside the house. Lucy Weber must have left, and my mother has come in to get ready for bed. I listen to her footsteps get fainter as she goes into the bedroom she shares with my father on the opposite side of the building. There's a timid knocking on my window, and I leap off my bed and wrestle the shuttery pane up its frame. It's Lucy Weber standing in the roses. I just wanted to come and say goodbye, she says. Thank you for not blabbing about me coming to the trial with you, I say. It was my pleasure to take you, she says. I enjoyed your company. And she hesitates for a moment and then reaches through the window and squeezes my hand. I want to do something nice for you, Leonard. I'm no fool. I know what kind of man your father is. So the last chapter of the book is in Canwood, so back in Canwood, hometown, in 1970. And Leonard comes back home because his father has died. So this is him coming back for the funeral. My mother meets me at the station. Pleasant journey, she asks. Good enough. She presses herself against me, less of a hug than a way a dragonfly lights on skin, how it rests for a moment and then pushes back off into the air it came from. I follow her out to the dusty, battered green Ford. You still have the truck, I say? lifting my suitcase over the side and into the bed where it sits behind the spare tire in a tangle of wire. It still runs, she says, so why not? She shrugs and gets in, hauling herself into the cab by the steering wheel because she's not tall enough to step up easily into the truck. We drive in silence, the prairie landscape unspooling before us. I've forgotten the grandeur of it, how it is vast like an ocean. Off in the distance, there's a column of gray rain coming down on some other patch of earth, some other community. I can't tell if the storm is moving towards us or moving away. It's one of the miracles of the prairie landscape that you can watch rain approaching hours before it arrives. I remember that from Alberta, too, that you could see that. At the house, my mother lurches the truck to a stop in front of the porch. You can have your old room, she says, when I come into the front hall with my luggage. It's much the same. I was waiting. She stops because we both know she was going to say next, and there's no point. Okay, I carry my suitcase down the hall. Tea, she calls from the kitchen? Sure. My bedroom is as I remember it, a single bed by the window, simple dresser against one wall, white wooden chair at the end of the bed. Sometimes I would sit in that chair and look out the window, past the rose bushes to the flat scrape of fields. On a windy day, the dust would rise from the fields like a veil. The immensity of the landscape made it feel as though I could see everything coming from far away, not merely the weather. Even words seemed to float towards me before they'd been uttered. Now I live in Toronto, the city of trees and ravines, streetcars and roads. The landscape interrupted every few feet. The only thing in that landscape that is remotely like anything that in this one is the lake, a flat blue tilt of it at the southern end of the city, cut off from my neighborhood by a tangle of expressways. I put my suitcase on the bed and go back out to the kitchen. My mother's made tea in a couple of mugs, and we take them out to drink on the porch. Thank you for coming, she says. You don't need to thank me. He was my father, after all. It feels necessary to come home for his funeral. What will happen to the house, I ask. A station master is given a house with a job, but now that my father's dead, there'll be a new station master in Canwood. I'll have to go. Soon? They'll allow me a few months. My mother puts her mug of tea down on the arm of her chair. I notice that her hand shakes a little now. Don't worry, I have a little put aside. I'm going to move into town, maybe rent a little house near Lucy Weyburn. You remember her? Yes, I remember Lucy Weyburn very clearly, in fact. She was always very kind to me. I think of the last time I saw Lucy Weyburn and how she held my hand through the window, how her words had shocked me because it was the first time that I'd heard someone speak out against my father. She took me to the trial when Bill was charged with murder. That vagrant you used to pester? He wasn't a vagrant. He just had a different way of living his life. Don't get upset, Leonard. My mother pats my hand. I pull mine away. I should go and unpack, I say, and get up abruptly and go into the house. In my old room, I sit down on a small single bed. The mattress is soft, and I can feel the springs digging into the underside of my thighs. It might be the same mattress from my childhood, and probably no one has slept in it since then. There were never many visitors to our house when I was young, and certainly none that ever stayed overnight. My parents didn't have very many friends, and no relations were near enough to visit. I touched the raised crocheted roses on the bedspread. Once bright red, they're faded pink with age from the sun angling in from the window day after day, year after year. There's a timid knock on the bedroom door. Leonard? I'm fine. In the silence that follows, I wait for my mother's footsteps to retreat back down the hallway, but she stands outside the closed door for what seems an unbelievably long time. I'm fine, I say again, and only then do I hear her weary shuffle down the length of the hallway towards the kitchen. When William Scott and I finally got to the bottom of my obsession with Bill, he wanted me to write a letter to my mother. He thought that I needed to forgive her. It was the only way to truly move forward, he said, but I couldn't write that letter. Every time I sat at the kitchen table in my apartment above the restaurant in Weyburn and put Dear Mom at the top of a piece of paper, I couldn't think of what to say next. My palms would sweat and I would get dizzy, and there seemed to be no stream of words that I could enter that would wash away the way I felt. I spent a year talking with William Scott 3 days a week. I still see him occasionally. After the Weyburn was emptied of patients and closed for good, he took a job in Ontario. He works at a clinic in Markham, outside of Toronto. Sometimes we'll talk in the morning when I'm at the lab or on an early shift and before his days have officially begun. I retrained after my failure at the mental hospital and work in a lab for infectious diseases now. No more patients, just microscopes and slides. I've moved from the doctoring side of the equation to the scientific side. It's probably where I belonged all along. I'm more at home among blood cultures than human beings. I open my suitcase and close it again. I don't really want to unpack, prefer to keep everything feeling temporary, like I could leave at any moment. But I walk over to the dresser and open all the drawers anyway. The wood smells like mothballs. In the bottom drawer is a folded bolt of fabric. I recognize the tiny repeating yellow primroses from the curtains above the kitchen sink. Childhood seems remote, like a landscape seen from the window of a speeding car, blurry and inaccessible. I can put my hand on the faded roses on the bedspread or on the worn, grooved wood on the top of the dresser, on this folded length of cloth, but I'm not feeling anything of my former life. I want to call William Scott and ask him what to do, but he's in the middle of his workday. The only phone in the house is in the kitchen. My mother would be able to hear every word I spoke into the receiver. So there's nothing to be done. And I go back out into the hallway and start walking towards the kitchen, even though I can't call William Scott to ask for his advice. I know what it would most likely be. Keep moving forward, Leonard, he would say. Don't let yourself fall backwards. My mother's sitting at the table, smoking. I thought you gave that up, I said. It's just for my nerves, she says, not looking at me, tapping her long ash into the green glass ashtray in front of her. I can see how much older she is now, how her cheeks are furrowed, and the skin around her eyes is lined. It makes me a little sad to think of her as an old woman. But then she was always careworn, always seemed a bit like an old woman, even when she was young. The green ashtray is in the shape of a fish. The cigarette butts covering the inside of it look like scales patterning the side of the glimmering glass creature. I suddenly have a memory of noise and lights, the creak of carnival music, and the sports field outside the town. Did I give you that ashtray? You won it at the sideshow. At the shooting range, I think. Yes, that's right. I can remember the weight of the gun in my hands, the spinning targets, and the wooden shelves overflowing with their bounty of prizes. Was this before or after the murder? Before, I think, when I was still relatively happy. You've kept it all this time? My mother looks up at me then. I can see her eyes are bright with tears, and she's been crying. Why wouldn't I keep it? It's a present from my son. Hi, Mom. I think it's Monday today. It's like January the 4th or 5th, something like that. So it takes me a while to get all this reading done because it gets your throat sore when you read out loud. I didn't realize that because I haven't done it for a long time. Anyway, this is the chapter where he's back home for his dad's funeral. We eat dinner mostly in silence, just the knocking of the cutlery against the plates. I can hear the click of insects outside the kitchen window in the waning summer heat. It's all so familiar, the sound of the insects, the mismatched silverware, the dinner plates with sheaves of wheat, and yet I feel removed from all of it, as though I'm watching from somewhere outside of myself. I look over at the refrigerator, which has shuddered and knocked itself back into life. Another sound I'm relentlessly familiar with, and realize from my days of working with William Scott that I'm showing signs of dissociative behavior. My mother has made me a pie for dessert. Saskatoons, she says, slicing through the crust and revealing the firm purple berries underneath. I thought you might have a hankering for them after living in the city. Thank you. I take the plate of pie and she passes to me across the table. Once when I tried to explain the Saskatoon berry to my wife Maggie, I said it was like a meaty blueberry. That was the closest I could come to describing what it was like. But really that wasn't close enough. The Saskatoon retains its shape when baked. It doesn't mush up like other berries or leak flavor in the cooking. The juice is the most beautiful purplish red, like a combination of grapes and blood. I used to pick and eat loads of berries when I was a child, stuffing my face with them from the shrubs in the gullies at the base of Sugar Hill. It's delicious, I say, and I don't say no when my mother cuts me a second piece of pie after I finish my first. And then just when I'm starting to relax, when eating the pie and thinking of the Saskatoons has made me feel like myself again, I can see the phantom bulk of my father passing behind my mother's chair. Can see how she flinches every time he crosses behind her and was out of sight, because often he'd hit her on his way to the fridge to get a beer, club her on the side of her head with an open hand and enough force to spill her onto the floor. What's the matter? Asked my mother. My hand with the fork is poised above the wedge of pie. Nothing, I'm just not hungry anymore. I think I've had enough to eat. Through the kitchen window, the sun rolls back behind the fields and the crickets begin in the yard. I can hear them tuning up under the rose bushes. I push my plate away from me. My mother pushes it gently, but insistently back. Finish your pie, son, she says. It's always best on the day it was made. It won't be nearly as good by tomorrow. After supper, I excuse myself by saying that I'm tired from my journey. Go into my bedroom and close the door. I lie down on my bed, fully clothed, and shut off the bedside lamp. The room is so dark that I cannot see my hand in front of my face. I switch the lamp back on. I would never hear him coming. That was part of it, the surprise attack. He was a big man, but he could creep down the hallway as silently as a cat. I wouldn't hear him turning the knob or folding the door carefully back against the wall. He would cross the floor while I slept, and I only woke when he was right there beside the bed, when he reached down and grabbed me, shook me from the shrouds of sleep. I get out of bed and take the chair and jam it under the doorknob, but then I remember that I did this once when I was a child, and he surprised me by coming through the bedroom window. I remove the chair out from under the doorknob and carry it back to the window. Then I lift the window in its sash and sit in the chair, lean my head out into the night, inhale the cool inrush of air, the scent of grass and road tar. Once I sat here like this as a boy, with my head out the window, and I watched as my father chased my mother around the house. She was barefoot but running hard, running over the stones and the dirt as though they were the softest grass. She made a grunting noise when she ran because she was trying to go her fastest, and it was taking everything out of her. No use, though, as he caught her near the downspout and dragged her out into the field. And all through that, I just sat still on the chair at the window. What I felt in that moment was not fear, but relief that it was my mother he was after and not me. I don't remember moving from the window or falling asleep, but when I wake, it's the next day. The bedside lamp glows dimly in the morning light, and I'm sprawled across the single bed with all my clothes still on, lying on top of the sheets. I feel foolish and grateful at the same time. It's the day of the funeral. I should have hung my suit up when I arrived yesterday instead of leaving it folded in my suitcase. But when I haul it out, it's not too crumpled. I lay the shirt and jacket on the bed and smooth them down carefully with the flat of my hand. My mother's standing by the sink, looking out the window and drinking a cup of coffee. She's wearing her one good dress, the same one good dress that I recognized from my childhood. Her hair is up. Beautiful day, she says, her back still turning to me. I pour myself some coffee from the pot on the stove and try to stand beside her at the window. Your roses are looking good this year. I've had more time for them, she says. It's always good to deadhead right after they bloom. Yes, they look tidier. I meant to cut you a spray for your room before you got here. No mind. Let me do it now before I forget and the day gets away from us. Before I can say anything to stop her, my mother's out in the yard with a pair of scissors, snipping the heads off the yellow roses under the kitchen window. Her bent body looks vulnerable, like a child. I can see that her hair is thinning across the crown. She comes back inside with a small bouquet, holds them up for me to smell. I drop my face towards them, but the sweet perfumed musk makes me suddenly nauseous. I sway on my feet, reach out for the kitchen counter to steady myself. What's the matter? Asks my mother. Nothing, I'm just going to go and get some air. I say, I'll meet you out at the truck. I walk slowly around the house until I'm at the back of the bed of roses. Pale yellow flowers grow along the wall of the house and twine around the door of the root cellar. When my father would grab me out of sleep, he would take me outside to beat me so my mother wouldn't hear. He would drag me around to the back of the house, to this place by the roses and the root cellar. It was on the opposite side of the house to the room where he slept with my mother. And in those days, she took something every night so she could sleep. I remember the army of pill bottles lined up in the bathroom medicine cabinet. On the better nights, my father would hit me until I fell, and then, while I lay on the ground, the scent of the roses drifted around me. Drifting around me, he would put the boots to me. On the worst nights, my father would beat me and then throw me into the root cellar and leave me there until morning. He must have weighted the door with rocks or logs, because it was impossible to budge from the inside, even though I pushed against it with everything I had in my panic to get out. He can't hurt you now, William Scott would say if he were here, but I'm shaking and still nauseous. Memory is a lesser substitute for my father's brutality, but is still terrifying. I slowly raise the wooden cover on the root cellar, lift it open, lean it back on its hinge against the wall of the house, and climb down the rickety wooden ladder of a staircase. I can't even now think of a reason why I was beaten. In all honesty, it never really seemed to be about me at all. Instead, it was all about quelling my father's rage. He had a rage that seemed to simmer for a while, and then it had to boil over, by necessity. The beating put everything back on simmer and made him calm and human again, until the next time. It was night, so I must be hit. It was Wednesday, so I must be hit. The world has treated my father unfairly, so I must be hit. He was a failure, so I must be hit. It had rained for 3 weeks straight, or it hadn't rained all summer and the garden was ruined, so I must be hit. Oh, that's terrible, eh? The smell of the cellar is the smell of darkness, sharp and damp and sweetened with decay. It is what blood tastes like, that smell. I would lie curled up tight in the hole of the root cellar. It was always cold in there and my body hurt from the beating. I curled up tight for warmth and to avoid touching the salamanders that lived in that dark place. Mud puppies, they were called, and they were sticky and cool when they scrambled over my skin. A frightening lizard with a comforting name of a pet. I've been inside the earth. I've closed my eyes and opened them, and in the blackness, my own hand in front of my face is impossible to see. I've been invisible. I've become this darkness I've entered. Darkness that's soft and cool and smells of mice and old potatoes. My mother is outside, standing by the truck when I come around the side of the house. Where have you been, she asks. I went out back and couldn't see you. She brushes down the front of my suit jacket. You're covered in cobwebs and you have dust in your hair. I was down in the root cellar. My mother gives me a strange look. Why would you want to go down there? I shrug and get into the truck. We drive along the dusty road past one quarter section and then another, the fields humming by, wheat changing to rapeseed and then to flax, a line of poplars or length of dirt road segmenting one field from the next. I've always liked the blue of the flax when the flower's in bloom. It's a blue like smoke. When a whole field of flax moves in the wind, it has the creep of water. My father was a godless man, but the funeral is at the Presbyterian church in the center of town. Where else, says my mother as she rocks the truck to a stop near the curb. We can't very well put him in the yard. Through the double oak doors, the church smells like rotted lilies. Probably remnants from the last funeral, like a stain left on the air. There are no flowers here today for my father. My mother didn't bring a spray of yellow roses to put on his coffin, and who would want to buy him a wreath? Certainly not me. He had a few drinking friends up and down the rail line, but no one in Canwood who was more than a nodding acquaintance. My father had a suspicious view of his fellow humans. Always thought he was being cheated or would be cheated, that people were nothing more than opportunistic dogs, forever on the make. I sit beside my mother in the front row. Few people wander into the church. I don't turn around to see who they are, and perhaps they're not even there for the funeral, but have wandered in by accident to enjoy the cool quiet of the church interior. But then someone deliberately enters the pew behind us, and I feel a hand on my shoulder. Hello, Leonard. It's Lucy Weber. She looks older, but the same. I'm filled with happiness at the sight of her. Hello, Miss Weber. She squeezes my shoulder, and I put up a hand to cover hers. Her skin is dry and papery. The box that holds the body of my father sits beside the altar. When the minister says the requisite words for the service, he has to look down at the sheet of paper in front of him to get the name of my father right. Afterwards, we traipse out to the gravesite for the burial. It's hot out now, and the minister sweats through his vestments as he sprinkles the words of God down on the wooden box where my father will be trapped for all eternity. My mother and I stand side by side, not touching, while the coffin is lowered into the sleeve of earth. There are bits of root and small stones studding the walls of the hole. The squawk of a magpie comes from a nearby tree. Amen, says Lucy Weber firmly when the minister has stopped speaking. The coffin has reached the bottom of the grave. It wobbles to a stop, and then the green canvas straps that lowered it are winched slowly up to the surface. Come back to mine, says Lucy Weber to my mother and me. I have some lunch laid on for you. As we walk away, I can hear the sound of the dirt being shoveled into the hole. It sounds like rain, like a hard rain driving against a window, like the kind of rain we sometimes had in summer when I was a boy. I suddenly miss my father, and I want to turn back to the grave. But Lucy Weber has me firmly by the elbow, guiding me towards the parking lot. I'm glad we're going back to Lucy's. It saves me from the inevitable crawl of small talk with my mother. We follow Lucy's white car through the cemetery gates, my mother wrestling the gears of the truck into their sockets, and me staring out the window at the granite markers, the itch of birth and death dates, the sprigs of bright plastic flowers. Will you get him a headstone, I ask my mother. I probably owe him that, she says, but it'll be a small one. Lucy's bungalow is cheerful, packed with furniture and knickknacks, plants on all the window ledges. It's the opposite of my parents' stark farmhouse with only my mother's few nice things to brighten the space. I like to have greenery in winter, says Lucy, as I run my finger along the frond of a potted fern. It helps dispel the gloom. She disappears into the kitchen to fetch the lunch. My mother kicks off her shoes and curls up on the couch with an ease that she never displays in her own house. I like it here, I say. Yes, she says, I do too. It's an oasis. Lucy reappears bearing a tray full of sandwiches with their crusts cut off and a pitcher of iced tea. She sets both down on the coffee table, shoving piles of books out of the way to make room. It's cozier to eat in here, she says, so let's do that. I'll just go and get the plates and glasses. She trots off back to the kitchen. The sandwiches are arranged in a wheel on the plate, salmon paste and ham and mustard, and what looks like cream cheese studded with chopped up dill pickle. They look so nice, my mother calls out. You shouldn't have gone to so much trouble. Nonsense, Lucy is back again, puts 3 glasses down on the table and hands us each a plate and paper napkin. It's the least I could do. She pours the iced tea. I wanted to help. I'm hungrier than I knew. Fill my plate 3 times with sandwiches, down the iced tea in a series of gulps. Lucy refills my glass. It's good to see you looking so well, Leonard, she says. It's good to see you too, I say. I've not forgotten her kindness to me, and I want to tell her that, but it seems impossible to do with my mother here. So it's a relief when, after a small plate of food, my mother announces that she's tired and should probably go home to have a rest. Leonard, says Lucy as my mother stands up, slips her shoes back on, smooths down the front of her one good dress. Why don't you stay for a bit? We can get caught up. I can drive him back. She says, all right. My mother makes no protest, and I realize that it's probably just as much of a strain for her to be with me as it is for me to be with her. Perhaps it's not just me who's making small talk. I watch from the window as she walks down the flagstone path, climbs up slowly into the truck, and backs down the driveway. Lucy comes and stands beside me at the window. It was good of you to come back for her, she says. But I didn't come back for her, I say. I came back to make sure that he's really dead. Ah, Lucy's quiet for a moment. It's hard on your mother, she says after a pause, that you've been so distant. I don't know if she means the geographical distance or my emotional distance, although they might as well be one and the same at this point. I haven't been back to see my mother since my daughter was born 6 years ago. My father was a terrible man, I say. A real bastard. I know. And she never left him. After everything he did to her and to me, she just stayed and stayed. She tried to leave several times. I don't think so. She did, says Lucy Weber. Trust me. But where was she to go? She had no money of her own. She couldn't get far. And each time she left, he found her out and forced her back. I hid her here once, and he kicked in my front door. You should have called the police then. Leonard, says Lucy. You want it to be simple, and it's not simple. She leads me back to the couch, and we sit down together. But it is simple, I say. He was a monster, and she let it happen. Did she? I think of my mother cowering in the corner of the kitchen, her arms over her head in a useless attempt to ward off the blows. I think of her kneeling beside my bed in the mornings after I had been beaten, wiping the dried blood from my face with a washcloth, her tears falling on my swollen eyelids. No, I say, I guess not. I guess it happened to both of us. Lucy puts her hand over mine. I'm sorry, I should have done more. It's not your fault. We're quiet for a moment. But why did it happen, I ask? Because I don't understand why my father was so violent to his family, to those he was supposed to love. I remember when the men got off the train, Lucy says. What men? Your father, Bill Dunn, how they came home still in their uniforms carrying their kit bags, how they walked off that train fresh from the battlefields of Europe, and they were expected to go straight back into their lives after having been gone all that time. After having fought and killed and suffered, they were expected to just pick up where they had left off. I knew that my father had been in the war, but he had never talked about it. He always evaded the subject if I questioned him about those years. But I didn't know that Bill had also been a soldier. How could they go on as normal, said Lucy, after all they'd seen and done? I didn't have this opinion at the time, but I think now that Bill was the smarter man. He knew enough to take himself out of society, to remove himself from his family. Bill didn't have a family. Oh, yes, he did, Leonard, said Lucy, but he didn't stay with them. He came home and right away he went to live rough. He might have spent a week or two with his wife and children, that's all. Then he left and then they left, and I doubt he ever saw them again. He had children. 3 children, 2 bigger girls and a young boy. His wife took them back east to where her family were living. Trudy, I think that was her name. She had the bluest eyes, funny what you remember of a person. I don't recall much else about her, but I remember those piercing blue eyes. It had never occurred to me that Bill had a family, that he had children. He seemed such a singular figure, striding through the prairie landscape of my childhood. But he never told me he had children. Leonard, why would he have told you anything? You were a child yourself when you knew him. Lucy doesn't know about my later, fateful encounter with Bill. She doesn't know that I was fired from my job at the Weyburn, or that Bill was there, or that he killed Henry Tudor. I'm not about to bring that up now. It's too long and sad a story, how Bill came back into my life and what happened to him because of our association. I do think Bill got it right, says Lucy, even though at the time, and along with everyone else in town, I thought he was cruel to abandon his family. But he knew that he was damaged from the war, and he knew enough to keep that damage from his wife and children, especially his children, she pauses. I'm sorry for what happened to you, Leonard. I do wish I had been able to do more for you and your mother. I'm going to take a break to get something in my throat. We're quiet again for a short while. I'm trying to get my head around Bill having had a family, having had a wife and children, especially children. What would it have been like for him to make a decision to leave them? Now that I have a daughter, I know how devastating it would feel to never see her again. But when you talk about when you talk about my father and the damage caused by the war, are you excusing him? I asked Lucy after a few minutes. Because I don't think I can do that, no matter what happened to him in the battlefield, or how hard it was to adjust to family life when he got home. I'm not excusing him, says Lucy. There's no excuse for what he did to you and to Janet. I just wanted to explain some of the background of his life to you, give you information that you might not have otherwise known. I was 7 when my father went to war. We lived in Prince Albert then, a bigger place than Canwood. I remember clinging to his pant leg at the train station, and how he spun me around before he hugged me goodbye. He held on to my arms and twirled me around, and I felt like I was flying. I can understand that he was a different man before the war, because I have those memories and to hold against the ones when he returned. Did Bill and my father know each other in the war then? I ask. They were in the same regiment, Lucy says. That's why they were both on the same train coming home. The men from that regiment would have traveled back from Europe together. There would have been weeks of travel. First the troop ship from Southampton to Montreal, then a train to Toronto, and finally the long train ride from there to Saskatchewan. All that time my father and Bill would have spent talking and being around each other. They might have got drunk together, or played cards, or simply looked out the window and made small talk. One might have fallen asleep on his head with his head on the other one's shoulder. They were most likely good acquaintances or even friends. At the very least, having served together and being from the same place, they would have known each other well. I think of how closely my father paid attention to Bill's trial for the murder of Sam Monroe, how he liked to recount the details from the newspaper to my mother at night, how he liked to quiz me about the murder. He never let on that he knew Bill, or that he had served in the war together, or that they had served in the war together. Was he ashamed of their association? Did he think himself the better man for resuming his life, while Bill had abandoned his family and become the local tramp? Did this make my father feel superior? Did he even know the sort of person he really was? I wonder whatever happened to Bill Dunn, Lucy said, if he's still in that prison. He died. How do you know? I keep track of him. Bill died the year after he was taken into custody for the murder of Henry Tudor and returned to the penitentiary. I'm not sure how he died, as no one would give me that information when I acquired after him, but I knew that he did die. That's a real shame, said Lucy. Yes, it truly is. I stay at Lucy Weber's for a while longer. She wants to drive me back to my mother's, but I wave away her offer and say that I could do with the walk. It's probably 5 miles, but I'm not bothered. When I was a boy, I could cover twice that distance in a day. My feet would fly over the earth, barely touching down. It's the end of summer, and the light leans on the horizon as though it's tired. The months of green and heat are shutting down, and I can already see the line that winter will take across the fields. I start out on the road back towards my parents' house, and then I change my mind. I find my way back to Sugar Hill by instinct. I could probably do it with my eyes shut. There's a road there now. The hill is the one high place in the area and must be popular with walkers and people out for a Sunday picnic. Hill is taller than I remember and full of small trees and a patchwork of scrub. There's a path that switchbacks to the top, well worn from boots and bikes. Before I start up the path, I look around the base of the hill for signs of Bill's old house. Nothing is visible. Whatever used to be there is long since filled in and grown over. There's no evidence that anyone ever lived inside Sugar Hill. I get down on my hands and knees and scrabble around in the grass and dirt. Sometimes I feel like I made up Bill's life here, that it was all some sort of childish mirage. But I uncover a small cache of bones in the depression of earth, and they look like rabbit bones to me. And by the beginning of the path to the hilltop is a rose bush, huge and tangled, but still recognizable as a cultivated rose, not a wild one. Along the path there are a few raspberry canes and a feathery top of asparagus plant gone to seed. The climb is a hard one, and I have to keep stopping to catch my breath. I remove my suit jacket and then my tie, stuff it in my trouser pocket. When I get to the top, I stand on a bare patch of hillside looking down. There's a charred piece of earth near my feet where people have made a fire. There are a few beer bottles and a couple of candy wrappers on the ground. In the distance are the familiar rectangles of the farm fields. A little bit of stitching below them that is the rail line. Strung out in a line along the rail tracks, the grain elevators are solid blocks of red and brown. I miss Bill, standing on top of Sugar Hill. I miss him with an ache that whistles through my body. All I have left to remember him are the 3 rabbits' feet, lined up on the windowsill of my daughter's bedroom at home in Toronto. Sarah likes to rub the softness of the fur against her face, or pretend that the feet are real rabbits, that they are her pets. Sometimes I take them down from the windowsill myself and touch the small, sharp toes, the hinge of knuckle bone, the soft whisper of rabbit fur. I miss Bill, and I miss the scrap of the past where we knew each other and belonged together. And I miss the future we never got to have. I miss the real possibility of a happy ending. I miss the intervention of a machine that will turn wrong action back into thought, anger back to love. It's fair to say that I never recovered from that summer at the Weyburn Mental Hospital. I'm not the self I was before Bill killed Henry Tudor. I'm happier now. But the strange thing is that I remember the past as more true, not less, with each passing year. It's not that events are sharper, but that they're more full of feeling. It's as if the events themselves have sloughed off their chronology and exist now only as pure emotion. It was thought that Henry Tudor had run off and was hiding in the hospital stables because he'd seen me come into the mattress factory to take Rusty Kirk away. And perhaps he assumed that all of the men would be taken away one by one, that his turn would come and he didn't want to disappear from the only place where he felt safe. He was probably hiding from me because he feared me, and when he saw me in the stables, he might have thought that I had found him, that I was coming to capture him and to take him away from the Weyburn. When he was advancing towards me over the stable floor, he was most likely surrendering. He certainly wasn't attacking me. Henry Tudor was disturbed, but he wasn't a violent man. Bill, on the other hand, was a violent man. I knew this myself, and it was in his file, the one that Luke Christensen had read out to me. Bill had mostly kept his violent urges under control at the Weyburn, but his attachment to me had tipped the balance. I can't forgive myself for what happened to Bill. It was my doing entirely. I can see now that I hung on to him too tightly, that I forced a relationship on him that he probably didn't want or couldn't handle. Henry Tudor's death, and Bill's too, can only be my fault. But I'd wanted to help Bill, to genuinely help him. He had given me hope and love when I had none, and I wanted to return that kindness. I wanted that very badly. What do you owe a person who has saved you? You owe him everything. These are the last green fields of August. From the top of Sugar Hill, they shine like emeralds in the sun, unnaturally brilliant in the way things are the moment before they start to fade. When I get back to the house, it's coming on supper time. My mother doesn't remark on how long I've been gone. We sit down at the kitchen table, eat cold meat pie and boiled potatoes, listen to the deep notes of the male news announcer as he talks calmly about the day's events and recounts the weather forecast. I'm restless from the funeral and the talk with Lucy Weber, from the walk up to the top of Sugar Hill, and all the thoughts in my head, the feelings in my body. After supper, I leave my mother on the porch and go for a walk down the dusty driveway. I walk out to the crossroads and back again, the fields growing golden from the setting sun, the neighboring farms set back from the road exactly where I remember them. Here in the prairies, it's the sky that changes. What's on the ground tends to stay put. There's the click of insects in the grasses at the edge of the road, and every so often a truck will clatter past, leaving a tumbleweed of dust boiling in the air behind it. When I get back to the house, my mother's still sitting on the porch, and so I go sit down beside her. The evenings are going to get cooler soon, she says. Yes, I've been thinking that too. It's funny how the change happens, how it just comes on all of a sudden, even though you expect it to be gradual. But it never is. One day you just wake up and it's coming on winter. Yes, it always surprises me too. We're quiet for a while. Been a long, troubling day, hasn't it? My mother says. It has, but it's a peaceful evening. Yes. Do you see that spot? My mother points to the ground just in the front of the truck. That's where he fell. Just tipped off the porch and staggered for a bit, then dropped right there. He was on his way into town to the hardware for some roofing shingles. She pauses. He was face down in the dirt. I let him lie there for a good long time before I called the ambulance, just to make sure. I watched from behind the curtains in the living room window. When the birds started landing on him, I knew for sure he was dead. Mom, I thought it would have happened sooner with all the drink. She looks at me and her eyes are bright. I should have done more, tried harder to get you free of him. Mom, it's okay. I reach over and take her hand. Honestly, it is. Her hand is so small as a child's. Her hand is as small as a child's in mine. I don't blame you. Because in a strange way, I was free of him. We sit for a long time like that, holding hands on the porch while the daylight thins and the night begins to come on, and the moon drags her light across the fields. I take a taxi home from the airport. It's been raining, and the streets shine and hiss as we drive over them. All the brightness of the city seems alarming after the emptiness of the prairie. Maggie opens the door for me. She must have been watching for my taxi through the front window. How was it? She asked, leaning up to kiss me. Brutal, for the most part. I put my suitcase down in the hall. But then better. How was your mother? She was okay. It was good to see her. I'm glad. Maggie puts her arms around me. I know you weren't looking forward to it. Well, it had to be done, and seeing her was nicer than I'd expected. Maybe we'll take Sarah out there for a visit at the holidays after my mother has moved into town. I think that's a great idea. I'm hungry and start down the hallway to the kitchen, but Maggie holds on to my arm. Before you do anything else, you should go and say goodnight to Sarah. She's been waiting up for you. I take the stairs 2 at a time, past the landing window, where the tops of the maples rise above the neighbor's roofline, past the bathroom door where its stained glass transom of a tiny bird perched delicately on a branch. Sarah's awake. You're back, Daddy. I am. It felt long. Yes, for me too. I cross the room and sit down on the edge of her bed. Shall we have a story now you're home? She says in such a grown-up way that it makes me smile. Sure, which one? My favorite. I don't need to open a book to tell this story. This story I know by heart. The story is one I'll always know by heart. Bill never likes to leave town the same way twice, I say. He strides out with an urgency I feel hard to match. He leads me through the tamarack woods. He leads me through the meadow bog. He leads me through the tall prairie grasses. The breeze blowing in the wind is warm, fragrant with night flowers. If I close my eyes, I can imagine it as the house in Canwood, and I'm a boy again, stepping down off the front porch on my way to Sugar Hill. That's it. That's a nice story, eh? I thought it was a really good explanation as to what happened, with Bill and his dad. So anyway, I hope you liked it too, Mom.